All right. Hopefully I'm back. What a bummer. Let me know if you could all hear me. It says that I'm reconnected. I don't know what the hell that was about. My internet didn't go out. My wife's on the same internet downstairs. I was still able to chat. So let me know. Okay, people can hear me now. Well, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna, yeah, that happens occasionally. I think that's just purely OBS's doing. I don't know why that happens sometimes, but the internet didn't go out. Does it say how many people are watching on YouTube? Because now it tells me there's only 3, but my guess is from the chat there's more than 3 people watching. I don't know. Who the hell knows? I think Jimbob. Here's what happened, that slippery prick Jimbob. He's trying to get out of this debate, so I called him out for pretending to have tech issues, and then he sent people to DDS. What's it called? DDoS attack me or DDS attack me. The bastard! I'm on to him. Yeah, we dropped from 160 to 43. Yippee! That's great. That's right. Mark it. Jimbob. DOS. I remember DOS. I'm old enough to remember DOS. Oh boy. All right. We got to do this. I'm sorry. We got to come back here and I got to. See if I can bring the camera up. No? Okay. I'm still here, Andrew, if you can hear me. All right. I don't know. I know as soon as I do this with the camera, it's going to be frustrating. Frustrating. All right. So what am I doing here to entertain people until... Let me sing my Jimbob song again. I made a little song for Jimbob. Well, I didn't make it, but I have a song for Jimbob. I sang it at the beginning, but now I'm running out of content. And also, I can't play audio on your end or I'll get flagged and blah, blah, blah. So it'll have to be a cappella. Fuentes Owens War. Yeah, I haven't followed it at all. Sort of. Oh, all right. We're good to go, maybe? All right, let's see. Never mind. It looks like I'm not singing. Let's see if I can get... All right, I guess I'll get ready to go, so...
Evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Crucible. I'm your host, Andrew Wilson. We're experiencing some kind of technical difficulties on the Jimbob side of things. I don't know exactly what's going on. He said he was having an issue with his camera, and I guess he's trying to take care of whatever that issue is. But this is like 25 minutes now. 25. Oh, I think he just popped in. Oh, I see him. I think he just popped in. I see him back there. I was about to come on and start swearing and calling him names, saying that it was a big patriarchy fail. He's back there screaming. He's back there screeching at the top of his lungs right this second. You can't see him, but I'm recording it just to put it out later. So anyway, topic tonight is going to be on the 19th and other liberation-related topics. It's going to be a head-to-head matchup between Rob, Noerr, and Jimbob. We'll be moderating this debate. It's nice to be back in the moderator chair. I haven't been here in a while. So let's go over the ground rules, just so everybody knows. We will be taking callers tonight. It's a full scheduled debate. We expect it to go for the full 3 hours, about an hour and a half of debate. Then we'll get to super chats, and then we'll get to callers. Make sure you send your super chats in if you have questions for people, and we'll make sure that we read those to the debaters. I'll kind of give the signal about 20 minutes before when we're going to take callers. Okay, I'll give the signal for that. And that's when we'll bring callers on. So that's it. That's going to be what the format is tonight. So there's a Dono chat link at the top. You can send in a super chat that way. You can send it via YouTube. Either way is fine. Remember, we are still raising cash as we are going to be heading over to the whatever podcast again. Jimbob just popped out of the studio. No, I'm not kidding. He just popped. I don't
running.
Know what the fuck is going
he's
on.
Running.
Right, he just popped out of the studio. But I'm hoping he's going to be back here. Oh, he comes back. I don't know what the fuck is going on with Jimbob's rig right now. I have no clue. But anyway, that's how you can send in a dono. I'm just going to play the intro, and I just kind of hope that he gets back. And if he's not back in time, then I guess me and Rob Noerr are doing a debate tonight on this shit. So anyway, yeah, I'll be right back with both of our debaters.
Could be an Andrew Wilson Rob debate. Nice.
As soon as I find the right shit. I'm on StreamYard, so it's different now.
Boomer Central tonight.
I gotta find the right shit.
No one can find the right.
Breaks my flow up, you know. All right, let me find it. Here
we go. Three old men.
All right. I'll be right back with both of our debaters.
Ah, shit. Woo! This is a good one tonight, man. Oh, let's do it. You know, I love this entry Crucible song. It's good stuff. Of course Andrew's a biased moderator. Everybody's biased. I'm a biased moderator as well, but Andrew's one of the best moderators, so I have the utmost faith that he will moderate fairly, even though he disagrees with me. Look at that, $50 already? Holy smokes. Crucible killing it with the donations. Sam Shuck's idea. Debate Rachel. Could do that. Yeah, the deck's stacked against me, but that's the way I like it. So even when it's the right wing audience.
And ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Finally, Jimbob, welcome back to the Crucible. You can do an audio check real quick for me.
Check. 1, 2. How am I doing?
That's a little loud. Hang on a second.
Right. Okay.
See if you can turn that down just a bit.
I could yell to match him. That's okay with me.
Yeah, give me a 1, 2, Jimbob.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Okay, and Rob, give me 1, 2.
Check. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Yeah,
check.
You guys are a lot more equal now. Usually to the audience, I do this backstage. Wasn't able to because there were some tech issues going on. Glad those are resolved. Jimbob, I'm going to have Rob open for this debate, just so you guys know. I'd like to keep it at 7 minutes. If you go a little bit over, no big deal. Rob Noerr, the floor is open for your intro. Go ahead.
All right. Looking to have a rehash of the ABC debate here, where I know Andrew's just going to jump in like David Muir and yell at me the whole time and fact check me the whole time. So it'll be good. Now, two of my favorite people here.
Just to fact check that. That's not true. That's not true.
Two of my favorite people on my favorite platform, the Crucible here. So it'll be good to be the bad guy again, as I started my first appearance ever debating Andrew Wilson as the bad guy. So be fun to do. Look, to start with, let me just be out front of what my beliefs are. I think that culturally I'm going to agree with Jimbob and Andrew many, many times on most issues about the importance of family values, of traditional roles of men and women, about the importance of men taking the provider role and women being great mothers and taking a supporting role and being the chief people responsible with raising children. I think that that isn't right for everyone, but that is how strong societies survive and how we should be pushing for. I think that we've gotten too materialistic as a country, and we need to strive against that materialism. And the number one hedge against that is promoting Christian values and having strong family values and ethics. So everyone out there, despite that you're all going to hate me tonight, that's fine. You should be trying to find a partner that you could be with, to have children, have many children, be very happy, and to walk a path of morality. You should be doing that. On this particular topic, though, I have to admit that my foundational beliefs of where I come from is that I'm a libertarian adjacent person. I am small government through and through. I am a minarchist. And so I am heavily critical of the government infringing on people's rights. Now, we can have a debate on what rights are and what they mean, but I think one of the fundamental things to that is people should be able to have a voice in their government, and they should not be restricted from doing so in the path of voting because of immutable characteristics. And sex, despite what many people on the left will tell you, is an immutable, unchangeable characteristic. I do not think because someone is born a female that they should not be allowed to vote, regardless if that was the way things were at the foundation of this country or not. If we want to have a discussion about should women vote, that's a different conversation as to should they be allowed to vote. If we're going to have a conversation of should there be barriers put up for everyone across all sexes or across all races or any other of immutable characteristics, so should you have to have a certain IQ? Should you have to be a landowner? Should you have to engage in military service? I'm willing to debate all of those positions, but it is not the topic of tonight. The topic of tonight surrounds the 19th Amendment and basically the core principle of should women have the right to vote. And I think it is morally incorrect to advocate for our government to take what I would consider to be an authoritarian position to say that women do not have the right to vote and have input in our system based purely on the fact that they were born a certain sex. I think there are three possible ways that we could look into this debate, and I think all three are important, and we'll see if Jimbob agrees with me that he would like to look at these in all three ways. The first is the question of ought, or the question of should they have the right to vote in a moralistic framework without using a utilitarian framework or a pragmatic framework. This question resolves around from forget about what women would traditionally vote. They primarily vote Democrats. This is how it's looked the past 15 years. This is a question that says the values, the philosophical principle, should they be allowed to vote regardless of the outcome? And I think there's a conversation to be had there. The second question is looking at the pragmatic and utilitarian side of that. How do women vote? What would our society look like if women didn't vote? Would we have different positions on abortion? Would we have different foreign policy decisions? Would we have a stronger border? Would we have different tax decisions? I think that that's something that's worth looking at and how that would look and whether or not that would be justification enough to prevent women from voting. The third question, which I don't know that Jimbob will want to talk about, but I think that it is massively important and why I hesitate to wade into a topic like this at this particular time is, what is the pragmatic effect of advocating for these positions, particularly some 50 days outside a massively important election? I think that there are issues right now that are incredibly important, such as mass censorship that's going to come, that'll stop great channels like The Crucible from being able to get out important family value issues, that they're able to reach thousands of people. And I think that that's only because we have fought back against authoritarian impulses to control free speech on the internet. If Kamala Harris and the establishment wins, that could be changing. And I think that it is incredibly a stupefying decision to have prominent people on our side that are advocating that women shouldn't have the right to vote in an election where clearly women are going to have the right to vote. And you may just inspire enough of them to vote against Donald Trump or to vote against populist or conservative value candidates because they will say, listen, even if I agree with them majoritarily on the policies they're issuing, I can't vote for a party that has so many strong people within it that are seriously considering saying that I must vote against my right to vote coming in the future. So I think that Republicans often, I don't even want to use the word Republicans, good people like populists like Donald Trump and their followers often fall into the trap of not being hyper-focused on the issues that could cause us to get these short-term victories that would be necessary to get better achievement, to steer the direction in a more Christian populist direction or a more small government direction in the future, because we end up having infighting on ourselves and split the discussion in so many ways. So although I think this is an important discussion to have, and I'm happy to have it because I think Jimbob's fantastic. He's someone I've respected for a long time. I always like Andrew and I like The Crucible. I think that the timing of it is improper. I would rather be talking about how it's important to win this election and how terrible Kamala Harris and the establishment is. But I'm happy to have this debate, and I'm hoping to convince a large portion of this audience, even if I can't convince you on point one, that morally women should have the right to vote, and point two, that I don't think the pragmatic effort of what women voting outweighs the moral reasons why I think women should have the vote. Maybe I could convince you on that third part that maybe it's an issue that we shouldn't be hyper focused on 30 or 50 days outside an election, because it only has the chance of causing us to lose maybe a few necessary votes that'll be needed to overcome the corruption that we face in this election, to actually get an outcome that has a chance to actually have a future where we can talk about these things.
You still have a minute and a half if you want to.
Oh, yeah, I will take that minute and a half to say the following. I suspect Jimbob wasn't having tech issues, but that he was trying to run from this debate. That's what I suspect happened. Let it also be known, although I am a rising feminist superstar, and I know I'm going to be called a simp and a lefty and a feminist and all that stuff, usually it is the largest left-wing streamer that is late. So I just want to say, maybe we got to see what Jimbob, maybe he's a secret plant and he's advocating for taking away women's right to vote because he really wants to sabotage the populist movement. And so maybe that's what's going on here. I don't know. I'd like to send a moderator to check Jimbob's camera setup to make sure that this wasn't a tall tale. That's it. That's the end of my time.
He did send me a DM and said that they had to finish banging his wife, Rob. I mean, that's excusable, right?
That's
fair. All right. Jimbob, you got 7 minutes on the clock. Go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Well, I want to start by focusing on what I'll be attacking tonight, which is the principles of female liberation, perhaps liberation in general, as a starting point. That liberty above all, is that actually a good position or not? When it comes to female liberation, I wonder, what is it they're being liberated from? Is it the oppressive arms of the patriarchy? Are they being liberated from the obligation to produce and raise good humans? Are they being liberated from their loving fathers who don't want them to become OnlyFans whores and cat ladies? What is it they're being freed from here? Now, I'm not only going to argue tonight that female liberation is a bad idea and produces results that aren't even preferred by my opponent, right? So the only reason the voting right now in the election is so important and so crucial and so urgent, all of the problems are actually caused by female liberation, I would argue. However, I will not be focusing on that tonight. I'm going to argue something far more fundamental. Tonight, I will argue that the female liberation is logically and practically impossible. I'm going to argue that female liberation is a lie. So, liberation itself is predicated on the idea of, well, liberty. Liberty is predicated on the idea of sovereignty and self-governance. Sovereignty and self-governance relies wholly on the threat of and the ability to apply adequate force. Like Jordan Peterson says, behind every interaction is the looming threat of male aggression. Now give me back my benzos, bitch. Now, I believe the following is a knockdown argument against female liberation. I'm actually going to bring it up on the screen and cover all your beautiful faces real. Premise 1, adequate self-actualizing force is the necessary precondition to sovereignty. Premise 2, sovereignty is a necessary component to liberty. Premise 3, women do not possess the adequate self-actualizing force for sovereignty. Conclusion, liberty is not possible for women. Female liberation is a lie. Rob is a progressive feminist. That's the last two are entailments. So, given that it's not even possible for women to be liberated, it's an apparition, it's a joke, it's a Sims game that's performed by, weaker men who think, that egalitarianism is a possibility. It's not. Now, one challenge for my opponent tonight will be convincing the audience why we should accept a political system that's rooted in a lie. Why? Is it okay to present women with a false liberty they don't actually possess? You know what happens when you give them a false sense of status? They end up like the chicks on whatever, and you've all seen them. They're living a lie. I don't think it's good for them. Another challenge my progressive feminist opponent has today is the paradox of women voting. Now, if Rob is against government expansion and tyranny, and he values liberty above all, does it make sense to defend women voting if it predominantly supports an expanding government which erodes the very thing he values? That makes no sense. And what is voting? This is a key component here. So what is voting? Voting is a way for men to produce blocks of influence in place of using their immediate brute force. It's a trade-off. When a man votes, he is forfeiting his will to power by way of immediate brute force in exchange for an ordered system of governance which is upheld by another kind of force. So simply put, when a man votes, he is trading one form of force for another. When a woman votes, what is she trading? Nothing. A man says, I will vote instead of fighting. A woman says, I will vote instead of what? Gossiping? The woman has no leverage to exchange. There's no exchange. Isn't it interesting that women forfeit nothing when she votes, and yet she can vote to erode the liberties she can't even defend? Is it interesting that a woman forfeits nothing when she votes, and she can vote to send men to war she can't even be drafted for? Should I add that the very ideals and values my opponent will appeal to throughout this debate were established by men with the use of threat of force? That out of declaration and the power, will to power, these ideals were set into motion. It was not established by an egalitarian system of the sexes, and it's not defended or enforced by an egalitarian system of the sexes. Now, my opponent, even though he's a progressive feminist, I will give him credit for how he runs his household. He runs a patriarchal, hierarchical system. It's a miniature government called the home. Everything my opponent values about his miniature government he calls a home is the fruit of its nature, which is patriarchal and hierarchical. The value of having a wife who can focus fully on raising good humans instead of working some cubicle job is not indicative of a system he's defending tonight. So it's interesting he defends the system I'm advocating for at the state or the federal level. But he lives that. He lives it in his house, but he's defending against it. Now, I don't necessarily think that women know what's best for them. But even if they did know what's best for them, they can't enforce it anyway. Any system of governance or ideology that attempts to disempower the patriarchy is feminist. My opponent holds a view that undermines his own home. My opponent is a progressive feminist. Feminism is a lie. I concede the rest of my time.
Damn. Okay. So some banger opening statements going into this. Let me remind the audience this is scheduled to be a full debate. We will be taking callers later this evening. Send in those super chats if you have questions for any of the debaters, or you just want them read when we get to the super chat section. Of course, all gifted memberships will be pulled up. And if you say something which is really fucking hilarious, but I don't think it will derail the convo, I'll pull that up on screen as well. Gentlemen, the floor is open. Let me remind you, though, before you get into it, that I expect both of you to adhere to my moderation. I don't mute people's mics. I just tell people to shut up and answer to certain points if necessary. My job is to be here to keep the conversation on track, not to interject. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So with that, the floor is open. Gentlemen, go ahead.
I have a request. Do you mind a request? Can you put up that screenshot again, just so I can take a picture of it, and then I get the exact
other argument?
Is that fair? Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
that way you don't have to keep pulling
that up.
I got it.
I was going to bring that up right now. Yeah, you can. Well, I could keep it up just if you want to address any of the premises to clarify anything. I would love for you to.
Okay, so the first is adequate self-actualizing force is a necessary precondition for sovereignty. So I'm not a wordsmith. I'm a very simple redneck. So let's talk through this real quick. What this is saying in a language that I would understand is I have to have the ability I have to have the ability myself as a man to defend myself and to issue force to defend myself, my rights, etc. in order to have sovereignty. And by sovereignty, you mean in order to have rights and ownership over myself, my property, my land, my family. Right? That's
Jimbob, you can pull that down now so they can see you. Go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll just go through these real quick, and then we could obviously talk about them. Second is that sovereignty, which we already find, is a necessary component to liberty. When you're saying liberty, you just mean like freedom. Like that's how you're defining liberty there?
Yeah, freedom. I would go with your definition of freedom. That even however you describe freedom, however I describe, it still would fall that in line. It would follow that this is a necessary component.
Okay, so then I think the rest I understand, though. Rob is a progressive feminist. Maybe I don't know what that means. That's fine, though. So, all right, if you don't mind, we can start there. We'll start with this, and then we could move on. So I think I would disagree with the first part, or I have some questions about it. So let's take the hypothetical response that there is someone who is a man, but they're wheelchair bound. They're paraplegic. Do they fall into the same definition as being a woman then because they do not have the ability to use force to protect themselves?
Well, they wouldn't fall in line with a woman. They would be a man who would still rely on other men to uphold their liberty.
So yeah, clearly, I mean, we're not lefties. We're not saying they're actually women.
No. Even men, regardless of their condition, are still left to the mercy of other men with force.
Okay, so just to be clear then, if we're going to take that to a real world example of things that we're talking about, such as voting, should those men have the right to vote? That do not have you're paraplegic, you don't have the ability, you solely rely on other men for your defense, for the use of force. Should they have the right to vote?
No, I would take their vote from them.
So then you would only allow the vote for men that are physically capable of using force to defend themselves.
Well, if they have property and are able to defend their property, for instance, if that paraplegic can't defend his own property, right? Would you say he could?
I think there are possible ways that he could, yeah.
Well, could he in relation to how most men can defend their property?
He wouldn't defend it in the way without like massive technological assistance.
Yeah,
or
he would
like,
need a lot of ramps and turbo boosters, right?
hey man, Neuralink to a drone with a 30-06 might do the job, you know?
You know, I would the question of how many lists of prerequisites we can list for men, I believe would be a separate. I think it's a fair question hypothetical, but I would start with the obvious is that men in general, right? There's an average. Men in general as a category are going to be the ones upholding, enforcing, or taking over a failed government. And women will never be doing that.
Okay, so two things to say on this. One of the central arguments that I'm going to have is, as someone that believes in more of a small government and individual-centered approach to life, I think that although certainly I'm not some deranged lefty, despite what you might be saying here, I understand that there are averages. Like, for example, men on average are much physically stronger than women. We get all that. I don't have to argue that. But there are certainly exceptions to those average. And one of the problems I have with your suggestion here is because on average women aren't able to use force, that they should holistically be excluded from things like voting. But men, and that's why it's important. Okay, fair enough. That's fair. But what I'm talking about is the exceptions, because what I take umbrage with is using immutable characteristics such as sex to deny people things like their right to vote. If you want to put a threshold on, like, let's say your argument would be this: anyone who has the ability to has the physical capabilities to defend with force their property should have the right to vote. And then I could argue that certain men don't meet that threshold and certain women do.
Rob,
that's a different discussion.
Rob. Whether you think they deserve it from some sort of metaphysical virtue position is irrelevant to whether or not they can actually defend it. So you can say you have the right to this and that, but the fact is women couldn't defend whatever they declared is theirs anyway. So it would be a lie. So what you're really asking, Rob, is can we just lie to women and say that they have the right to anything, even though they can't possibly defend anything that you're saying that they're given? So, for instance, let's go back in time at the construction of your the values and the paradigm you value so much, the Constitution, right? Even before then, this kind of talk about how to declaratively state the position of your own sovereignty. Do you think a couple of people in wheelchairs and women, if they were the ones who found the papers and the documents, do you think that they could possibly defend it?
Well, it's
couple
a
of
different. I'm trying to answer as honestly as possible. It's difficult to think because we had different things technologically back then. But the spirit of what you're saying is certainly true. There needed to be some level of physical capabilities, and I think even more important than that, mental capability. Like have the aggressive nature and sort of the the mentality that's a protector type mentality. I agree with all of that. The fundamental disagreement we're having right here is I don't think that we should judge people as collectives. I think we should judge people as individuals. And so if we say there are certain metrics as an individual you need to meet to have things like the right to vote, I'm open to hearing it. I might disagree with them, but what you're doing is saying we judge all women on the average and we judge men on the average.
Okay, yeah, we can do it your way too. If we selected every single woman in the United States right now and we looked at them and we said, is she capable of defending herself and fighting against other men? And the answer is no. We can call the accumulation of all the individual ladies out there who can't defend themselves, who can't be self-sovereign, who cannot take over land or defend their own land. If we went one by one, and it turned out, Rob, that 92% of them were inadequate, that they did not possess the adequate use of force to defend their own liberty. Would it follow that we can maybe collectively say, women, you're not voting? If there's some freak out there, who's a woman who's just insanely strong, and she even says, listen, you don't even have to lower your standards. I'll go into the army. I'll go into the military. I'll do what it takes to fight or whatever. If that freak of nature makes their way into all these various places that among men, that's an exception. I don't think there's anything wrong with building a governing system that's based on generalizations that are demonstrably true.
Okay, are you for affirmative action in the current system that's set up, like racial affirmative action?
Affirmative action, like just giving someone a job because of their...
For example, I'll give a real-world example. The Biden administration suggested giving farmers of color that needed help, suggested giving them money. Is that a policy you would be for?
No.
And do you think that you have a fundamental disagreement with that policy because it doesn't give based on need, but gives based on immutable characteristics?
Well, it's under a false assumption. So that policy is as much a lie as your policy of securing female voting, even though they exchanged nothing. I wanted to go to voting right here. Did you agree with my assessment of voting?
I certainly will, but I just want to stay on this issue real quick.
No, it's irrelevant because
I don't think it is, though.
It is. How are you going to draw?
Let me show you. Because I think that those policies are immoral because they're based on immutable characteristics. If, however, the Biden administration would say the following: all farmers that are in X number of debt because of our lockdowns, we will give money to, and it turns out that number resulted in 99% of the people that got that money being black farmers, I'm more okay morally with that policy than saying, no, it will be based solely on race. Race is a prerequisite. I think if you share, and I would think that deep down you would share my outrage with that sort of race-based policy.
No, I'll show you why it's disanalogous. Would you like to guess how it's disanalogous before I tell you?
Well, I'm not going. Do you want me to guess what you're going to erroneously say? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Let's see. You will say, I don't know, surprise me.
Okay, what's in question right now is not meritocracy or effort. What's in question now is a descriptive truth of reality. The descriptive truth of reality in my argument is that women do not possess the adequate self-actualizing force to defend their own liberty and sovereignty. Whereas when you look at a farmer of color, whether or not they deserve money to be a farmer or not based on their skin color isn't reducing it to the necessity. Now, for the female reference, it's about necessity. If it's the fact, if you can't change the fact, Rob, that women don't possess the self-actualizing adequate force to defend their liberty and sovereignty, you saying, oh, that's not fair, it's an immutable characteristic, is like saying it's not fair a blind person can't be a pilot.
I disagree because I think you've already disproven your own point by saying you've already conceded that if there is a freak out there that is a woman that has the ability, from what your definition would be, the ability to use force to protect, that you're still okay excluding them because you're okay with policies based on generalizations. And so that in itself proves that you are not advocating a system of meritocracy, which again, if your argument was this, I think that you set some test up and says you have to pass this test to prove that you have self-actualizing force to be able to protect yourself. And anyone that passes it goes. And maybe 95% of men pass it and only 1% of women.
Sure.
That would at least be a meritocracy. That wouldn't be generalization.
Okay, but is the draft a meritocracy?
No.
Okay, so are you for egalitarian draft then?
No.
Why not?
I'm not. Because I think that, generally speaking, that when it comes to forcing people to go to military service in times of a crisis, that it's okay to use the generalization of the poll that we should generally pull from.
Okay, I see.
Let me finish. But there are certainly look at it in an individualistic sense as well. So we don't say all men are eligible for the draft. For example, we say if there are disabilities with certain men and they're ineffective, like that, right? Like
okay, hold on, Rob. Generally speaking, okay, they have some standards, but if it came down to it and all bodies were needed, I'm not certain they'd include the rolly guy down the ramp, but certainly people you would otherwise maybe say stay back on this. If the situation permitted, yes, the government would draft everybody and anyone who could do it, right? And you're saying, well, I'm about egalitarianism and it shouldn't be immutable characteristics. Whereas now you're saying the immutable characteristic it is to be a man, the traits to be a man, that we have thicker bones, we're stronger, we use brute force, we're more likely to use aggression, we're fit for war. That's an immutable characteristic. But if you were to be consistent, you would say, well, if we're going by immutable characteristics, we should draft all the women too. Just because they're women, doesn't mean they can't give it a shot or whatever. And the fact, the irony here is that if you were to open up the draft or the military to egalitarianism, you're going to weaken the force that you, Rob, need to uphold your sense of liberty and sovereignty.
I don't disagree. It's convenient for me then that I'm not opening up the draft to women. It's not an argument that I'm making. The couple points I'll make on this. One, if things got so dire that we were drafting anyone necessary, there is a chance that this insane government would be drafting women anyways. And there might even be a point where you would say, yeah, at some point maybe it would be necessary to draft able-bodied women if things were really out of hand, like we're alien, it's an Independence Day scenario where aliens are attacking and we need every available body. So that's number one. Secondly, there's a difference because what we're talking about here with the draft is a situation where there is an emergency for the immediate protection that we're forcing people to do something for the greater good, which is to protect our country. This should only be done in drastic emergency situations, which would be very rare. That's different than sort of a positive right of saying we are restricting people's positive rights based on immutable characteristics.
You're talking about a vote?
Yes. And
so
again,
you think a vote is the right?
Yeah, I think that, yes, that you should absolutely, if you are forced to be a citizen of this country and to pay taxes into it, do you think that if you're forced to pay taxes into this country that you should have a right in the direction that the country goes?
Depends. What constitutes the ability to sway how the country goes is a different argument than whether or not you think voting is a right. Now, is it possible, hypothetically, to vote to remove your vote as a right?
Yeah. Okay. Women could theoretically, we'll get to this later when I sort of get to the things. Hold on. True.
Just one at a time. Mm-hmm. So if it's the case that you can use a vote to eliminate your own vote, which is, by the way, during the suffrage, the actual association that was promoting women's voting, they actually shut down the voting and blocked the women because they were about to show up and vote against their own vote. So if it's possible even today to vote in a way that removes your own vote, and you're saying, well, I don't believe in limiting people's positions or rights based on immutable characteristics. Well, you think it's okay if you can vote their rights away based on their immutable characteristics.
I don't think it's okay. I think it would be a bad idea.
It's an entailment that voting could lead to the removal of rights. By the way, the voting bloc you see today, you've heard it a million times, Rob, the increased female voting actually votes for policies and expanded government that limits what? Your liberties. So if it's the case, Rob, that you can vote to take away what you call a right, then what the hell's a right if you can just vote it away?
Well, what's a right is a difficult question to answer, right? Because we would say that there's questions of where our rights would come from. Do they come from God? Let me ask, since you're interested in what the definition of rights are, I'll ask you, do you believe that you have any rights? And how do you define rights?
I don't really believe in rights. I believe men have duties. And if rights exist, even if I were to take a pragmatic approach of being like, okay, I kind of know what you mean by rights, it still necessitates a deontological position that needs to be grounded, which is to say, do we have a duty to secure and defend rights is not built into the description of the right itself, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there's a meta-ethical position that grounds a duty. But from my view, if you had a Christian ethical system and all your duties were being fulfilled, the things that you call rights violation may not be consistent with how you currently see rights violation today, because duties would always supersede rights every time. For instance, if it were the case that it was a duty to limit liberty in the short term, and you used your voting method that you're defending, women coming in and voting, they can hypothetically and have voted in a way that removes your rights temporarily or something like this. So this is why I'm confused that if the thing you're defending is a thing called a right that can't be removed based on immutable characteristics, and yet you can vote on removing that thing based on immutable characteristics, I'm not sure what it is in the metaphysics you're actually defending that somehow stands above and supersedes the very methods you're appealing to, in this case, voting.
What I'm saying, so I'll explain. I think that the default position, I'm not an anarcho-capitalist, I'm not a complete libertarian. So my belief is that the role of government is this, that it should be as minimal as possible. When I say rights, I'm saying each person has the right to the best of their ability to control their own life until it negatively infringes in a direct way on other people's lives. So I have the right to shove shitty fast food burgers in my mouth if I want. The government should not be allowed to come in and say, you can't eat those shitty fast food burgers. There are emergency situations that have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis where sometimes those rights could be temporarily restricted. Let's take disease, like things like COVID. Obviously, the restrictions are the pandemic. Obviously, the restrictions under the pandemic were gross, overreach, disgusting. I argued against them the whole time.
Would you call them feminine?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
they were authoritarian and feminine, of course, right?
Yeah.
But you could envision, let me just ask you, could you envision a time where the government would be justified in saying, look, temporarily we need to restrict the movement of people because of some sort of pandemic, such as if a dirty bomb was released over a particular city in this country and it was so contagious that it had a 98% kill rate. Do you think that the government has the right, or whatever you want to call it, to restrict people temporarily in that format?
Well, the government has the only thing that enforces rights to begin with. So it's not even a right. It's that the government has the capacity to do that, and you can't do a damn thing about it. Well, so that's the fact, right? So it's not like that's not fair, I'm going to hold up my sign and make a post, right? The reality, Rob, is that the force wins. And if force wins, the only real question is, well, what's informing how and when to use force adequately? Now, the reason I bring this up is because if it all comes down to adequate use of force of self-actualizing men who can defend or use aggression, we're talking about women. So I wanted to bring it back to voting, Rob. Did you agree with my opener that voting is a temporary transaction that a man, when a man votes, right, or a collection of men vote, what they're doing is they're putting aside their immediate brute force option and they're trading it for brute force option at the end that's enforcing the policies that they're voting for. Is that fair?
No, I don't think that's all that voting is, because I think there are men that are incapable or unwilling to use brute force that still vote.
Okay, gotcha. That's a good point. It kind of goes in my direction, is that, but for the men who could collectivize and use blocks of brute force, instead of doing that, wouldn't you say voting for them is an agreement to then use a voting block to influence policy, which on the tail end is buttressed and enforced by the threat of force?
Well, yes, but you are correct that no matter what we vote for, that there is, through the point of a gun at the end of the day with the government, which is how it's enforced. But real quick, before I leave you go, the word collectivizing is doing a lot of work there, because I think one of the failures in your argument is going to be that it's not just the ability to use brute force that ends up in the most force possible that's able to convince people to do things. There are other things that aren't brute force, some of which women might be quite capable of.
Manipulation?
Manipulation, or it's the negative spin on saying persuasion.
Right. Well, men could manipulate too, so I'm granting all the ways in which things could be manipulated socially, shaming. In the end, though, you would agree that a vote itself is a trade of one type of force potentiality for another, right? That's fair?
The word, define the word force. Or do you just mean like physical? No, I mean, do you just mean like physical aggression force? Or like, is there a form of force that's like financial manipulation? I could force you out of your home by...
will to power, brute force, not soft force, not manipulation.
So you mean like force. Physicality?
Yeah, I'm saying that voting, the agreement to vote, right, for a bunch of people, the agreement to vote is an alternative to another option called, let's get together and use threats of violence and actual force. It seems like a weird thing to not concede that voting is a conflict resolution apparatus in place of brute force.
It's not just voting, though. Right? Even if I grant your premise here, voting is a mechanism through which what you're actually talking about occurs, which is the idea to collectivize as a government, right? So if you go back to historical times, what governments actually began as, it was sort of a collectivization of people that said, hey, if we all come together and specialize and give a little bit up, then we'll end up better as a group.
Okay, perfect. That's actually better. So I would reframe it to fit your assessment, which is when a group of men, either individuals or collective, vote for a certain thing, what they're doing is instead of them forming another competing government, they're using a vote in place of forming a government to counter the actual government, and they're using a vote to buttress up the current government, right? So now you're talking about whether or not men are currently forfeiting their ability to form another competing government, right? Because that's what you basically just said. If a group of men vote, would you say they're voting that an alternative to voting could be rising up with guns and forming their own government?
Sure, there could be a lot of alternatives to that specific vote and a lot of alternative to government or isolation from the government. Now, I will say, I'm happy to leave you continue down this line of questioning.
Yep.
However, I'm not a lefty that's going to leave you walk all over me, and I'm going to control the direction of this at some point.
But
I'll let you go with it. I'll let you control the direction for now.
The only way I can move along is that if
that's
you
fine. I'm
at
just
least
making
grant or concede that voting is a form of offsetting or mitigating immediate brute force among men, and they're appealing to an already existing government.
I don't think that that's the only option, but it is certainly an option to say that voting is a way to ensure that it's just not like pogroms or instant use of force to achieve what one wants.
Yeah, I would say it's a peaceful apparatus for men to use, where they appeal to a monopoly of government and force that's going to uphold the policies that they're voting for instead of them getting together and enforcing the policies they just make up, right? Instead. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I just wanted to get it out there what it actually is. Now, the question in my opening is, if it's the case that a singular man who's voting, and he's voting in place of the alternatives, I want to know what is it the woman's doing? What are they forfeiting if they have no leverage when they vote?
Well, they do for two reasons.
What's their leverage?
One, we're going to get into what your definition of a threshold of force, because you've already said there are certain men that don't reach that threshold for what you would say. So one, I think that many women do meet that threshold. And second would be you've already conceded that there are other things other than just direct physical force that could lead to more force. You call just manipulation, but I think people could say you could also use the term persuasion that wouldn't have a negative connotation, which women would be able to have.
Did you say many women meet the threshold of, say, equal force to men in in a war situation?
I didn't say equal force to men. I said they would meet a threshold. They would meet an adequate threshold of being able to deliver force. So let me control the direction here for a second. We've already said that there are certain men that wouldn't meet the adequate definition of force, you would say, because if we remember, let me bring up your picture again. The first part of your, what are we calling it, a syllogism there? The first part of it says you need adequate, is the word you use, self-actualizing force. So because you've already admitted that there are certain men that don't have adequate, I think that it's necessary for you to define exactly what that adequate self-actualizing force would be.
Well, adequate would be able to would be the ability to shut someone down, end their life, or take weapons from them. Like, that's a good statistic. That's a more individual. You like individual things. It's the case statistically, the disparity between a man who has no gun taking the weapon, whether it's a gun or a knife, from a woman in high probability, like super high reproducibility, whereas a man taking the same weapon from a man is lower suddenly. And so if it's the case that the adequate use of force on average is that men can overpower women. How do we know this? Historically, a collection of men who organize a government and a nation, they defend it adequately. So invasion would be a good one. Defense from invasion would be another good example. If you paired a bunch of men next to a bunch of women, right? Even I'll ask you, Rob, if there's a country of who share the same values, right? Libertarian values, your values. One country, all of their army is men, and the other country, all of the army is women. Which of those countries are you going to live in if you share your values?
You're cutting out a little on me, but I think I got the gist of the question. I would say that I think that obviously the army of men in general, though I think that but let me say that that's going to be not a good analogy for two reasons. One, I think that gap is actually closing. I think more important, I think your better argument would be not physicality, but because we're advancing to a point where technology through things like firearms, even drones, etc., make physical demand less important, still important, but less important than it was, say, in the 7th century or something. We could argue about it. We could argue about it, but
let me counter that. Let me counter
real quick. I have a point to get to.
No, hold on. Let me counter that one thing. That's just reallocating the brute force of men to some other position, which includes machining, carrying large missiles around. The drone chicks who are in Burbank and they think they're playing a video game is really not a good hypothetical to use to try to equalize, to say that technology equalizes the sexes. It doesn't. Not even close. It's not even close to equalizing the sexes.
It's not a matter of equalizing. The word you used wasn't comparative. It was adequate self-actualization. So you take a clever trick there. When we're talking about self-actualization, what you're talking about is, as an individual, can you protect yourself from other individuals? And then the examples you start to give, we'll get to disarming a woman with a gun versus disarming a man with a gun. I'll get to that in a second. Other than that, the examples you give are, what about a military of men protecting against a military of women, which would be better? But that gets away from the point of adequate self-actualization. I would argue today, and remember, your point is it would only be a freak woman, possibly, like the fringe of the fringe, that would have, quote, adequate self-actualization of force. Correct? That's what you're saying. It would be like less than a percentage point of a percentage point when you say a freak.
But it's an exception to the rule, but we're talking about rules here. So I would ask you, Rob, if it is adequate, why would you choose the men and not the women? It sounds like you could choose either or and you'd be fine.
No, it doesn't, right?
Why?
Different than saying which would be superior.
So
it's a different question. Again, the incumbent... Now listen.
Hang on, guys. Hang on, listen. This is beginning to stray away from the topic a bit, and instead it's becoming kind of a pedantry debate over the use of this term, which is fair because you did give a formal argument, and it's fine for Rob to dissect that argument. But instead of us kind of arguing past each other, let us take a minute to define the terms to both of your satisfaction. So let's start with adequate. I think, Rob, that is your point of contention, correct? Okay, so if you're saying adequate force, I just want to make sure that we're clear on this. Do you just mean the ability to impose your will with force?
Yeah. Yes, and adequate is in reference, in this case, to other men. In fact, so if there's some sort of gradient of adequacy, this actually demonstrates my argument that reality is patriarchal and hierarchical. So there's hierarchical even.
Well, hang on. Before we get to all the descriptors, I want to just make sure that the definition is correct.
Yeah,
Rob,
do
you accept that definition of adequate? And if you don't, it's totally fine.
Yes,
right?
that definition's fine. I think that the descriptors he gives for it's where I'm going to have umbrage. So it seemed to be, if I may, it seemed to be that what he said was the way he defined what that adequate would be that can you disarm a man coming at you with a weapon? I think that is completely arbitrary. For example, if
hang on. I think you're right. But as far as giving, so one of the big kind of like debate games, as you know, is if there's kind of like tangential examples given to an on-the-spot descriptor or definition. That's why instead of us kind of going down the path of nitpicking the ideal of the definition, let's just get to the definition that both of us can agree on, unless we just can't agree on the definition.
Okay, I'm actually going to let Rob define it, the adequate, because
it's on you to define it.
But no, he answered a question that assumes he knows adequacy too. I'll tell you how. When I asked him the hypothetical between a country that shares his values, that is defended by women, and a country that's defended by men, him making the determination that the men are more adequate, he already has a sense of what that it's. So why, but why would you choose the men? I asked you.
That term more adequate doesn't even make sense.
Why
in this
did you
context.
choose the men?
I think men in general are superior in use of force than women.
More adequate?
No, the term, I'm not using the term more adequate because it doesn't make, and I'll explain why. It doesn't make sense because the term you're using, which is necessary for your definition here, is just adequate. And so my contention, to stop beating around the bush, is this: a woman that is proficiently trained in the use of firearms, that carries that firearm with her regularly, is adequately able to protect herself from a man that is aggressing against her more than a man who is not trained in the use of firearms and is not carrying a firearm.
Okay, great. Does it follow that because that woman has the freedom to operate a gun and wear it and she's well trained, does it follow that she and other women are adequate enough to defend that right to own that gun and to have that gun on them?
Yes, that woman would be, if that woman would have an adequate defense. When you said that your definition is that, like, some attacker, that you have the ability to defend yourself from people that are aggressing against you. Yes, that woman, when she would have that gun, would have the ability to do that. And the problem is you don't have a good threshold. You've already conceded that certain men don't meet this metric. I agree with you. If we're looking at a world of 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, before we had firearms in basically any home that wanted one, like in our great country, that there was more of a hand-to-hand necessity to defend yourself if you're on your own from someone else. But in a world like the United States today, where there are more guns in this country than people, and there are many women that are trained very proficiently in using those guns in a defense. And by the way, this isn't hypothetical. It happens all the time. There are women that fight off rapists. There are women that have fought off muggers. There are women that have killed burglars. So to claim that those women, that it's only a freak amount of people, you're implying here that there's somehow some need of physical brutality that women's bodies are incapable of having. And I think that the firearm training would be superior to that physical brutality in 90% of situations.
I got it, but you're looking at this in a very myopic way. For instance, you're granting them guns, right?
Sure.
Okay. How do they get guns?
What's it matter? Did you make your own gun?
No, but men made guns.
It doesn't matter.
Yes, it does matter.
No, I'll tell you why. Because you're talking about the self-actualization of force, right? Let me finish. So now, let me finish, please. Let me finish. Yes, if you as let me finish. If you as an individual created your own gun and say, that would be self-actualization, fine. But you don't get to say, well, in general, a man invented the gun and created the gun you're using. And so therefore, if you're a woman, that doesn't qualify as self-actualization of force. But if you are a man that did not create that gun, but by the mere fact that you have the same genitalia as the person that did, then you using that gun is self-actualization. Can you explain to me why it's self-actualization for a man that didn't create a gun to use the gun to defend himself, but it's not self-actualization for a woman that didn't create the gun to use it?
We're talking about the categories necessary, the distinct categories necessary for guns to even be possible, which is men exist.
It's irrelevant to the people that exist today. The woman right now, if a woman is born today, and I'll explain why. If a woman is born today, and then 18 years in the future, we'll say 21 years into the future, she's gone out with her awesome father hunting all the time. By the time she's 12 years old, she goes to the range with him every week. She takes self-defense classes with firearms. She is incredibly proficient with a firearm. It is not correct to say, well, because when the gun was invented hundreds upon hundreds of years ago, it was men that invented it. Therefore, she can't have self-actualization of force. Your definition includes the necessity for self-actualization. And when pushed on it, you immediately go to the generalization. You say, but other men, and that's why your definition's erroneous.
Look, if we agree that when it comes down to it, the woman has no capability of using the gun unless it's made by men, whether that's true for me too is irrelevant to the point that men are needed and are in a different category.
Can a woman create a gun?
If there was a gunsmith or a metalsmith, a woman who's making a gun, talk about a freak of nature. They're going to be in the minimal. We wouldn't certainly depend on women, right? So me saying I depend on men to make guns, right? To maintain guns, to facilitate larger scale military apparatuses and weaponry, right? If that's all needed for what you're defining as self-governance, right? And women on wholesale don't do it, can't do it. The thing is, I could do that. That's the difference. That's the difference.
The could doesn't matter. The could doesn't matter. It does not matter. With your definition again that talks about self-actualization of force, right? Like, so for example, now you're getting into a whole different ball of wax, right? Because you could say there could be some dude that's like hulking, that's like one of the most badass fist fighters you've ever seen, but maybe he's not very bright, and he wouldn't have the first damn clue in how to create a firearm or how to use
carry missiles.
Okay, but he wouldn't have.
There you go.
Let me finish.
Done.
He wouldn't have the first idea to how to create a gun or even how to use a gun. When it comes to his ability, but we're not talking about things that. No, we're not.
Yes,
your definition is talking about in order for you. It'll work better if you don't interrupt every 3 seconds.
Okay, sorry.
I was generously. Okay, we're talking about for the beginning of your syllogism that you have to have the self-actualization of force to have sovereignty. So talking about what people could collectively do in a military situation, you could carry missiles. None of that is relevant to your ability to defend yourself and your property through the self-actualization of force. For the idea that you had to be the one to create the gun, to have the self-actualization of force to protect yourself or your property is nonsensical. And even if we accept that premise, which I don't, women could easily create guns today through things like 3D printers. And so, I don't think you sufficiently answer or even give even a remote answer as to why if a man who never created a gun uses a gun, that's self-actualization of force. But if a woman who never created a gun uses it, it's not self-actualization.
So why is it the case that even you hold to a threshold, right, between a group of men and women and a group of men and women going to war, and you'd always pick the men, right? If the threshold. So wouldn't it be the case that even if we couldn't get to the highest resolution of the threshold, we would agree just generally together that men have the adequate self-actualizing force to take over other men and women, but women have neither?
No, I would say that what we could agree to, which I'd be willing to agree to, is on average, and I'll go further than that. It's more than just average. It's the preponderance that on average, the preponderance of men are going to be better at these things than women. But again, remember, the core criticism that I have of what you're talking about is the fact that you're using broad generalities and saying all men and all women. And I think that that's erroneous, and that continuously shrinks when we're talking about your premise needing to be, for your syllogism to work, the very first premise is that you have to have a self-actualization of force. And I think there are many competent women in the use of firearms that could defend themselves and their property because it doesn't just require brute physical strength.
Rob, so like let's take the Marine Corps or something like this. Now, would you agree that generally speaking, we'd have to say that the test to get into the Marine Corps has some standards, but ultimately it's like an invented arbitrary plan, right? Like, see if you can do this. If you can do it, great. If you can't, you can't, right?
Correct.
Even the standard set up is arbitrary, right?
Yes.
Okay, but it's still required to get into the Marine Corps.
Yes, I assume there's base level tests. Sure.
Okay. So
excuse me, sorry.
So I'm not sure why, if you're arguing, oh well, it seems like an arbitrary threshold, but even you and I agree that the standard set for Marines shouldn't be lowered to match the capabilities or the incapabilities of women in the Marine Corps, right?
That's true.
Okay, so why?
Because what you're talking...
What is it about men that they can do it, but the women can't? Are we not generalizing that men, right, on net balance, men are capable, if they work at it, to, there's some percentage of men that could make it into the Marine Corps and pass the test, but there's no women who could do it.
Let me answer. It's bad form, but let me answer this question with a question. Would you acknowledge that the purpose of the Marine Corps, hypothetically, because this is a volunteer army at this point, we're not talking about a draft. You agree with that? Like people that are registering for the Marine Corps, the purpose is to have sort of the people that are really good at that, like the best are people that are really good, correct?
Yeah, which is never a woman, right?
Okay, fair enough. But you grant that that's the purpose of it. Saying that one group of people is the best or amongst the best is different than saying adequate. Your argument hinges on the fact, in order to have sovereignty, which is sort of control over your life, right, is how we're defining sovereignty, is basically how we talked about it, that you need to have self-actualization of force. My argument is that a single mom with a fucking gun, when someone breaks into our house, can shoot that intruder and will have more success than a man who is not armed. And so, therefore, I think that we could reasonably say that that particular woman has, because of the invention of the firearm, regardless if she ever created it or if a man or a woman created it and invented it originally, her right now have the ability to have the self-actualization of force when she has that weapon, and therefore she has sovereignty. Therefore, based on your own syllogism, she should have the right to vote.
Okay, so that one who did that.
You think there's only been one woman that's defended herself or her family with a firearm?
No, I'm just saying, starting with the one, right? So the thing is, if you're going to make a sweeping statement that all women should vote just because they're human, right? You're making the generalization here. I'm saying, well, interesting, Rob. If we actually set up a threshold of adequate force and you said, look at this fluke woman, she was able to shoot the robber, and then you ignore all the other times where they just fucking die and get raped, so, which is the majority of the instances when women. So when you see the YouTube, women doing the thing, and you're like, sweet, pro 2A, I love this stuff. That's not the majority. That's an exception. Now, even if I granted, Rob, okay, that one single woman, because someone invaded her house, she got a pew and it went in her favor. Now she gets to vote. It still wouldn't change the fact that on net balance, women are incapable of defending themselves because if that were true, Rob, there would be a bunch of those women and you could order them together, right? And get them in a bundle. And you could say, you defend this state right here. And you could do that. But you can't do that, can you?
No, again, saying defend a state, we're talking about people that are volunteering to be the best of the best, right? And again, I want to go back to this. Go back to my opening, please. It's important. Let's go back to my opening statement. I'm prepared, and I've talked to you in your show before about the idea that there should be certain thresholds to voting. Now, my threshold is going to be much lower than what you would prefer. My default threshold is, I think that in order to show that you have the bare minimum to have your vote counted, that you, unless you have some sort of debilitating disease or you're serving overseas or something, you should have to show up with ID on voting day and vote in person. That is the bare minimum threshold that I think is practical, that we could enforce right now, and I think that would get rid of a lot of disinterested or low information voters that don't even have the energy to go there.
Who can
you
said enforce.
But let me. You can go back to this line of question, but let me finish my point. So that's a different debate than what we're having. I made it clear in my opening statement. The problem I have with saying wholesale women shouldn't have the right to vote is we're not dealing with sort of a meritocracy and saying there are certain thresholds that we need to have people pass for anyone then before they could vote. My problem is that you are denying people things like the right to vote based on immutable characteristics. And when I ask you your reason why, you give me this syllogism, and you have failed the first part of the syllogism. Let me, real quick, let me finish. I promise. One more sentence. And my argument, I'm more than happy to get on why I believe that the rights should be that we should default to people should be allowed to vote with immutable characteristics. But we're starting with the position that you wanted to argue. If you want to move on to what I want to argue, that's cool.
I just want to ask you a question. A 12-year-old boy, the age that they are, the current age that they are, is that an immutable characteristic?
No, because it changes. Immutable means not changing.
Is their current age immutable? They can't change it.
Well, sure, they can't change their current age.
The answer, yes. So
it's not immutable.
No, hold on. It is immutable because they can't change their age by will, right? It's part of their nature. So when you say immutable, you say it means part of their nature. So if it's the case that a 12-year-old boy, his immutable characteristic is currently his age, and you're not letting him vote based on his immutable characteristic of his age, you would have to say that's wrong.
No, I don't. I think because everyone has a potential to reach an age, so when someone's born, they're not told at the moment of birth, you will never have a voice and be able to vote in this country.
So it is an immutable.
So do you think? So then it is not immutable because it's ever changing, right? Even though you can't will yourself to change it in the direction that you would want, it is ever changing. So everyone has the potential to do that. You're not disqualifying some, and clearly it's okay to have laws like age of consent laws and some. I'll turn the question to you. Do you think that under your system then, that you would be able to deny people the right to vote based on their race? If I could prove to you that people racially, for example, are more prone to not being able to defend themselves or more prone to making bad decisions, do you think it would be acceptable for this country to say, for example, Asian, people of Asian ethnicity can't vote, people of certain black ethnicities can't vote? Would you bite that bullet?
Based on just them having a skin color?
If I could prove to you that the outcomes of them voting would be detrimental to this country in general, would you be in favor of saying that we could restrict their right to vote based on something like race or ethnicity?
No, I would take the approach that you would take, and I think we'd agree once we set up standards for what it is to vote. Now, if they're
thank you for conceding the debate.
Hold on. No. If they're under, if they don't own land, no, that doesn't concede. All we did is say, well, if the argument is whose standards are determining who can vote or not, us both agreeing that we have different standards, but we're willing to impose those standards is not a concession at all. It's the fact that you're saying race is somehow equal to sex, and it's not. And here's why. Because sex, you agree, sex, there is a massive disparity between a woman's ability to use force and a man's ability to use force. So that alone, the starting position, right? You said they have a right to vote, right? You have a right to vote?
That's what I said. If you're
okay.
Yes.
Okay. So they have a right to vote, right? So their vote can send my body to another country, right?
Theoretically, yes.
Okay. So how is it their vote, they have a right to vote to send my body or my own children to some other country to die, right? But they can't even defend their right to vote.
Well, why not? You already
why
conceded.
Can't they? Because men. No, listen. Can men with guns right now take the women's right to vote?
Theoretically. Could women with guns take unarmed men's right to vote?
No.
Why not?
Because they're weaker. The same reason you would choose. Hold on. The same reason you would choose to go to the man's country. No. You can't escape this. I asked you. No, listen, hold on. I asked you if there's two countries that share the same values, and one is run and enforced by purely men, and the other is purely women. You choose the men. But now in this instance, you're saying, well, women could just as well take men's rights to vote. Please tell me when that's ever happened.
It doesn't matter if it's
possible. You said it's possible. That
it is possible.
You can prove it. How?
Show it, I can show you easily it's possible. Have you followed any of the footage of the Ukraine-Russia war?
Give me an example.
You haven't? I'm giving you an example right now. Okay, so you haven't followed any of the Ukraine-Russia war. Then I'll explain something to you that's happening. One of the things that's quickly happening is drone warfare is largely overwhelming superior infantry. So theoretically, it would not be hard to envision a group of trained women who are giving military hardware of drones with such as machine guns, flamethrowers, grenades on them to be able to overtake a town of all men that were unarmed. It's easy to see that would
those are robots. Who made the robots?
It doesn't matter.
Yes, it does, dude.
It does not matter.
Does it not matter who makes the fucking tanks?
It does not once they have access.
It doesn't matter.
If it matters, Jimbob, if it matters, then let's say this.
Who assembles the missiles?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, right? So let's say this. Let's say that tomorrow, Bill Gates has never personally made a weapon at all. Never. He's never even lifted a weight. He's never thrown a punch. He's never been in a bar fight. He never never gotten a scrap outside the fucking train tracks at high school. He's a wimp. He's a puss. He can't defend himself against anyone. But he decides to take his billions of dollars and buy a personal mercenary army.
Who made that?
It doesn't matter who made it.
Yes, it does.
Okay, I'll tell you who made it. Not Bill Gates.
A man did.
Doesn't matter. Again,
yes, it does.
Again, you are saying that you can't get away from this fundamental fact. You can't articulate why, because it's all about the individual. Let me finish, right? This is where we're two ships passing. Your syllogism starts with the... I'm not avoiding, right? I'm articulating this.
You're being a progressive right now.
I'm not being a progressive. You're being someone that's incapable of understanding what I'm saying. What I'm saying is as follows, that you start under the premise of sovereignty is necessary to have sovereignty. It is necessary for the individual to have adequate use of force, right? And then you say, if I say, but wait a minute, it's easy to see with technology, if people get their hands on technology, that they would have the use of force. Your answer to that is, but that woman didn't create that weapon. A man created it somewhere.
I understand what you're saying.
Let me finish. I don't think you do. I don't think you do, because we keep coming back to this. I've asked this question twice, so I'm going to ask it as clear as possible this time. Why is it that if a man who's never punched someone, who's never worked out, never been in a fight, never created a gun, if he uses a gun for force, force, you say that is an example of self-actualization of force. But if a woman in the exact same position who's never created a gun uses that same gun for sex to defend herself and her property in the exact same way, you say that's not self-actual. You can't get around it.
No, I would say in that instance, that's an adequate instance of self-actualizing force. That's not what's in question, Rob. Well, now, back to the tank thing. Here's the problem. I asked you, is it possible for women, a group of women, to take over men, right? And you said, have you seen the Ukraine footage? These women are using these drones.
I didn't say women were doing it.
Okay, whatever it was. Okay, you said it's possible hypothetically to use drones, right?
Yes.
To use drones. They're using the drones. You say it doesn't matter where they come from. I'm asking you another question. Is it possible for a bunch of men to go in and and take all the drones and all the technology from the women?
It depends.
Using force?
It certainly would be possible. It could be possible for women to do. Yes.
No.
Yes.
Okay. No. Hold on. Let me finish now. If you know it's possible for a bunch of men, because you're appealing to women suddenly have drones and Xbox controllers and they're bombing stuff. See, women could win too. No. First of all, they're using the technology that men made. Second of all, it's not irrelevant. Why? Because those things need to be put in places by men. So they couldn't actualize. Look, could they not actualize the missiles themselves if it not for men using their force to put them together, to move them with brute force and put them into positions, put them inside the tube to be launched? Is it possible? Could they do it? No, it's a simple question. Could the women actualize drone weaponology without men putting it all into place? Yes or no?
I'll answer. Give me 30 seconds. Yes, they could do it because there are machinery that could do that heavy lifting. In fact, it's not as if men are lifting these big missiles and putting them in silos. They're using machinery. Again, we get back to this fundamental question, which is you are saying because you collectivize people and you say that on one hand, self-actualization is what's important, that what you as an individual could do. But if a woman or man do the exact same thing with the exact same technology, you say it only counts as self-actualization when the man does it because other men that he had no connection to whatsoever theoretically invented or built this stuff, whereas with the woman that didn't occur. It makes no sense.
It does make sense.
It does not make sense.
I'll tell
and
you,
we're
Rob,
stuck on this point.
Rob, I'll tell you why it makes sense. It's because the reason you didn't answer the question, right, is because you know actualization cannot be divorced from the thing that you're using.
That's... of course it can.
No, it can't.
It is irrelevant how I came.
I'll ask it again. You're not answering the question.
That is nonsensical.
Rob, I'm going to ask it one more time. A woman who's sitting in Burbank with a joystick and bombing people using massive bombs, could she actualize that weapon without men?
Yes.
How?
She has the weapon right now. So if men ceased to make that weapon, she could actualize it without men right now.
She could make that weapon and carry all the...
She doesn't have to make it. She has it.
No, she has it. Why?
It doesn't matter why she has it. She has it.
Great.
The point you're making is, let's say humans cease to exist today, right? And two alien cultures come down, I don't know, I don't follow sci-fi that much, but two alien cultures come down, right? And one's physically stronger than the other, but the other finds all these stockpiles of firearms, right? And they start whooping ass. Would you say, well, they're not self-actualizing force because it was only because of human men that they could do that?
Well, no, it wouldn't be self-actualizing because they didn't actually make the thing. Right? So it's irrelevant. It is relevant. No, it is relevant because you're just saying, well, self-actualizing at some particular instance, is it a prerequisite to let's say an instance of the gun, right? So you can say at a micro level, the woman who's defending her home is actualizing something once she has the gun. But if you pull it out, right? If you zoom out, she doesn't have the gun without the self-actualization of someone else, right? So
the same is true of an individual man. Jimbob, let me ask you this question. Do you watch any sports?
Not totally, no.
Okay, let's say that hypothetically you're a fan of the Dallas Cowboys. And I know people like this, and they'll say, man, we should have won that game last game. Really? What did you do, if you're including yourself in we? You think that's ridiculous when people say shit like that? We should have won the game? They're not part of the we, right? They're not a player.
No, yeah.
Okay, same argument applies here. Just because I'm a man and some other man did something great and created a weapon and some other man mined the fucking materials that were necessary to create that weapon and then some other man in a factory I didn't do shit when it comes to self-actualization to do other. I went to the store and I bought the gun. Then I trained to use the gun. Then I stopped the home invader using that gun. Yeah. If I do that, do I get to say, well, that counts as self-actualization because some other man created it? Is that self-actualization on my part?
I would say I like the analogy attempt, but even in that instance, the only people who actualized it were the players. And I'm saying women aren't players and men are.
That's okay. You could say some men are players, but that individual man that's using the gun that didn't create it did not self-actualize force. Into your definition, correct?
I already granted. I don't know. You got muted.
Andrew, you're muted too.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Rob.
Sorry.
I was actually just slightly tweaking your mic level, and I accidentally muted you. Go ahead, man.
No problem.
I'm sorry.
What I'm saying is that even if I grant it at a particular instance where someone is taking what they have and actualizing whatever they have, the fact that they're using something else, right, now necessitates something that's not them, right, and it keeps expanding out. I think we can agree. The reason I asked you, Rob, if it's the case that women could invade and take over men, and you said using technology, that necessitates the men, right? There's no way around it.
It does not. It does not today. It may have necessitated the accomplishments of men in the past, but when we're talking about people's ability to use force today, you could easily see. Okay. And again, I'm going to take this debate in at least the third direction that I wanted to. How much longer do we have, Andrew, so I could at least get in one of the topics that I wanted to talk about?
Well, we started a little late, so we still have plenty of time. We still have about a half hour of the debate left.
Okay. So I'll wait until we get to like 20 minutes.
Yeah, I want to run this one more question here, and we'll try to move off this particular part because it's looping now.
Sure.
Okay. Same question. There is a country of men with drones and the ability to use the drones and make the drones, and there's a country of women who have the same drones, right? They have equal firepower, equal cartridges, equal amounts of people, but one's men. And you had to decide which one you were going to move your family behind. Which one would you choose?
I'm assuming, can we also just one little pet peeve I have to say they have equal training, roughly equal training as well? Okay,
sure.
Then the men.
Okay, so in your instance, when I ask you, okay, there's men could take over the women, and you said, well, the women could take over the men too. Okay, now they're fighting each other, right? They have the same amount. You're still going to side the men, right?
Correct.
Okay, so but why if they're equal in training? And
if all things are equal other than the biological reality of them, men are more, and it's almost, and I think one of the good points that you're not making that you should be making more, it's less, I do agree that physical ability is part of it, but I think the mentality is even more with men. That men, on general, it's certainly true that men have a mentality that's more protective and more. They're not going to be as passive when it comes to protecting themselves and their loved ones.
Great. So one more question. There's two adjacent nations. They both have the same drone technology. Barely any non-tech robotic technology. One is women, purely women. One's purely men. And you were to bet on who could take each other's weapons, who would you bet on?
I would bet in the men.
How many out of 10 rounds?
9.5, 9.9.
Out of 100.
999 out of 1,000 times.
Okay.
There is the off chance that a woman could. None of that disputes anything that I'm saying. Again, it goes back to this idea of the collective. We're talking about whether or not individuals should be able to vote. Or
do they vote collectively?
But they. What do you mean? Do they vote collectively?
Do we vote collectively?
Individuals vote, but it is a collective tally.
Yeah. Like you get together with people, and everybody gets together and they all vote for one thing and they kind of agree to vote for one thing.
Sure, as individuals, we have a shitty two-party system, so and then collectively vote. But again,
and then is the enforcement of what's voted for using collective force or individual force?
Collective force.
Okay, so if it's the case that the enforcement of policy through voting is using collective force, right? It doesn't really follow that women would have a say if they collectively can't enforce the things that they're voting for.
My argument, which you're argued against, was that for reasons of liberty, that each individual should be able to vote. And you said that women can't have liberty. That's what you said, correct?
They can't maintain their liberty.
You said they can't have liberty, and the reason is because they can't have sovereignty, and sovereignty is necessary for liberty, and they can't have sovereignty because they don't have the ability for self-actualization of force. So all that matters for your argument is arguing the individual level. Does the individual have the ability to self-actualize force? And I'm sorry that it appears we're looping. I don't agree with this syllogism. I have a different interpretation. But I'm saying on your argument, I'm taking your own definition and proving why you're wrong. Because all that matters for the first part of your syllogism is the term adequate self-actualization of force. And you are conceding that women have that, an adequate ability, if they have an equalizer like a firearm. The reason you're saying that it doesn't count in that situation is because somewhere men created it somewhere else. But I'm saying if we're going to apply that to the woman, we should also apply it to the man. Does a man have the self-actualization of force necessary to stop an armed gunman if he didn't create the gun? Just this individual. Don't look at it collectively. Rob Noerr here. I didn't create the gun. I didn't mine the gun. So when I use the gun to defend my property, and let's just say for this hypothetical that without the gun, I have 0% chance. 0% because this person's physically stronger than me and is armed. So I would have 0% chance. Does that mean if I use the gun to stop him that I did not self-actualize a use of force?
Rob, you keep going back to the particular. You've already conceded, Rob, that enforcement of votes and policy happen at the collective.
It doesn't matter for the use of your syllogism as to saying the women can't have liberty because they can't self-actualize force. You're now making a separate argument. You're not saying at the collective with your syllogism. You're saying self-actualization of force, not collective use.
No. If collectively, you need a collective of men who are individuals who can actualize the use of force to uphold and enforce policy that's voted on, right? And women can't do that, right?
Sure they can.
No, they can't. You think we could swap all of our men who enforce policy with women, and our country would maintain a coherency?
No, it wouldn't be the same level. But again, there's two levels to this. We didn't even get to it. One, I have three things to say about this. This is completely a different argument than the argument you started with, which to me seems to be an admission that you know that there's problems.
No, it's a magnitude. No, it's not, Rob. It's an order of magnitude. Look, if it's the case that men collectively, that your society of liberty requires groups of men, a group of men to enforce. And I'm asking you, could women do that? Could women collectively swap out with men today, right? The enforcement arm, the applicator, could they all be women? And we would maintain, and you admitted, no, it wouldn't be the same adequate force. I'm asking you, would a group of women serving as the pure arm of enforcement in our governance, is that adequate force to uphold our government?
Probably not.
Great.
Okay, but again,
on that basis, I don't think they should be able to vote.
Okay, listen. So that's a completely different rationale than you first gave, and there's a lot of things to say about it. For example, one of the things we talked about was the ability to persuade. Oftentimes, more important, although it is necessary to have the grunts on the ground that are doing things largely, it's becoming less and less necessary with the advent of technology and the ways we're seeing it. So you can do things more remotely, which means that physicality isn't necessary. And it's been the case for a long, long period of time that the people that use the persuasion actually have the ability to use force more effectively than the individuals that make up the collective of the men that are that defense force. So having a silver tongue and being able to persuade people actually means that you're able to use more use of force than just being an individual that's there. And certainly there are women historically and even today that would be capable of doing that. So again, that would mean that they would have this use of force. Now we're probably about the 20-minute mark, so I'd like to move on to the one section that I wanted to talk.
If you took your best persuasive woman, some plant who's using her sexuality and her whispers,
sure,
isn't it the case that force would still defeat that person, even if they were a man or a woman?
Well, hypothetically, but you could say that about any man or woman.
You just take them out. So
you could say that about anything, isn't it?
Yeah, but men can be persuasive too, so it's not a good argument in defense of women, because men could use status and notoriety to manipulate.
But
the
again,
question isn't. No, hold on, Rob. Stop interrupting. Can you use persuasion alone to uphold the liberty and freedom and sovereignty that you value so much?
It doesn't matter if it's persuasion alone. If the most effective tool...
That doesn't answer the question,
It certainly does.
I said, can you use that alone?
I will answer this question on the condition. I'll answer it with a yes, no on the condition. You answer the following question with a yes, no. Fair enough?
Fine.
Okay. No. Okay, my question to you is, in a world
you didn't answer it.
I just said no. That's
Okay.
that is a literal yes
said
no
now.
answer.
I thought you
Okay.
said now.
No, I said no. Okay. Now, given that in a world where we have so much technology such as firearms and things like that, is physical capability alone able to overthrow a government?
Physical capability
Correct.
of using technology.
No. Physical capability, your physical buffness,
Yeah.
your ability to fight.
Yeah.
That alone could overthrow a government.
If you're appealing to technology, can you rephrase your question? There's
Yes.
a bunch of technology.
In a world where
right?
we have like armies with guns and missiles and warships and tanks, could
Yep.
some dude, just a bunch of dudes that are buff that don't have access to that through their physicality, overthrow governments like that?
No, if it's man versus man, right? The men who built the technology and the big scary missiles and carry them onto the on the Navy ship and everything else, who built and maintained the tanks, those men are superior. The argument isn't whether or not there's a patriarchal, hierarchical reality where force wins, and that includes men winning against other men. That's obvious. What we're saying is that if you took your top butchiest women with the bluest hair, Rob, the bluest hair, and you gave them all of the training and all of the free technology. They didn't have to build it. All the men did it for them, and they just granted them missiles and all the planes. And you took a bunch of dudes who had not as much of the military equipment. I would still bet on the men eventually winning.
Betting on the men is one thing. You seem to imply that you pushed me into this bad analogy where I had to answer a simple yes, no, if persuasion alone could do something. No, you concede similarly physical aggression or physical ability alone couldn't do it in the world of technology. So you're in the same position as me. Once you start to expound upon it, I can make the same sort of expounding when I talk about persuasion.
No, I didn't say that.
I could.
No, Rob, I made it very clear. You cannot separate brute force and brute strength from the creation of that military equipment.
Yes,
dude.
you can. You
No,
can't
you
separate.
can't.
You can't separate. Could you? Okay, but then you can't separate persuasion and intelligence from the creation of that, because someone had to persuade those people to come together to work together to create firearms. Correct?
I already told you that persuasion could happen with men and women. It's irrelevant
That's
to whether or not
true.
Rob, it's irrelevant to whether or not brute force is a necessary precondition to make large tanks and missiles.
Okay.
Is it not? It's not?
Because it'll always go to this infinite regression where you say because of the inventions of men 400 years ago, that means that only men could have self-actualization.
How does making a missile and large missiles and large tanks not necessitate the brute force of men?
So you mean like they have to physically lift the missiles and things of that nature?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Machinery? How do you think they get
that?
it?
No, that just changes the technology.
Who makes that? Again, other women
Who runs that? No.
People make machinery. Again, you're playing this step that's like
You're-
somewhere there's a factory worker that's a
Dude,
man,
if
right?
you
There are
have to
factory
deny-
workers that are women too. Of
if
course,
you-
on
no,
average, they're more
we're not
men.
talking about
I'm going to
putting
get to the
rivets.
shit I want to talk to now. So
We're
if
not
you want
talking
to
about
keep
rivets. We're not talking about Rosie the
I think I've
Riveter.
been
We're talking
incredibly
about-
generous in sticking
Fine,
on
move-
exactly what
fine,
you wanted to
move
talk
on,
about,
fine,
right?
I'm okay.
So
Move on,
okay,
move
so I
on.
wanted to get to the third part of this. Will you concede this, that there is zero chance anywhere in the near future that we have this country women cease to vote?
Do you think I think it's possible where there's a time where women cease to vote?
In like any time in the near future?
Yeah. I hope to see that in my lifetime.
Okay,
voluntarily.
but give me your best case scenario for how long you think it would take, being as optimistic as possible.
4 generations.
Okay, so you're talking like 50 years, maybe 60 years?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, if we could push it to like 40, that would be a really fun game to play.
How do we get there?
How do we get there?
Yes.
Well, it would be a combination. One, I would use on women because their subject to it is a lot of propaganda. I would argue that what's best for them, like they knew during suffrage, what's best for them is to not vote. What's best for them is to focus on being good human beings, because a society that thrives, even under your liberty above all paradigm, requires people that are good. And those people, those good people, are raised by good mothers, and those mothers are not out doing OnlyFans and working for Nike in a cubicle, right? So I would use a combination of persuasion. I might even use women voting to eliminate their own vote, because that was the start of it. The irony is that the suffrage movement had to shut down. Susan B. Anthony had to shut down the voices of women, which is ironic, who were saying, we don't want this. We don't want this. Okay. So ideally, Rob, it's actually a persuasive argument first for women because I do think culture influences. However, I would not be opposed at all if the government was somehow infiltrated by Christian ethicists who were men who just said, you know what, we're going to pass this thing, whether we do it by force or whether we do it by separating ourselves from the current democratic system, or by passing a bill that basically eliminates women voting altogether.
Okay, so the first part, there's two separate arguments there. I'm glad you got to that second part because it drastically changes what I was going to talk about. On that second part, just for clarification, you would also agree that could take 4 or 5 generations before something like that would be possible?
Unless there was some sort of collapse, I think the default, if there was some sort of collapse, food shortage, resource shortage, electricity, I think the default reality would be women would not even be thinking about being in a position of like power or assuming their authority. All the loud biatches on whatever would be crying in a basement somewhere.
Okay, given that both of those strategies, which again, I vehemently disagree with, but we're talking the practicality of endorsing these sorts of positions that women can't vote and what that does for us politically in the near term.
Politically.
I think that this is disastrous, particularly 50 days from election to be talking about. And I'm grateful that people in positions of leadership are not endorsing these sorts of policies because it would all but guarantee a loss in this next election and future elections for the next 10 to 20 years. Because
what is it you're preserving, though?
The idea that things can't get worse is nonsensical. Clearly,
no,
things
I don't
could
believe
get
that.
worse.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, I want to preserve watching your show and learning things from you and watching The Crucible. And if the establishment gets their way, they're going to completely censor the internet like you see them doing even more egregiously in places like Brazil and in the EU. It's going to get worse and worse here. And so given that you think in a best case scenario that we're 4 or 5 generations, 50 years out from being able to actualize any of this, I think the best chance to be able to actualize the things that you want, and again, I'm disagreeing, but I'm just talking as a pragmatic way, is to run from announcing this position, particularly people in positions of leadership, as fast as possible. The more you advocate and tell women who make up 50% of the electorate, we ultimately want a society where you don't have a voice in the way our governments ran, they're going to vote against even the positions that would incrementally get you to a place that you think would be more acceptable.
Rob, do you accept that women voting in general may have caused the problem that you think is so urgent to fight against right now?
I could say in the aggregate, like in general,
yes.
If women didn't vote, wait. Let me be clear. Yes and no. The specific ones that we're seeing in the outcome that they've came, yes. Do I think that there could be creeping authoritarianism even in the position of this country that eventually would have came if we never had the 19th Amendment? Yeah, I think that it's certainly possible, but certainly it was probably accelerated and made more egregious based on the fact that how women have traditionally voted in the last 40 years.
Okay, Rob, my next question is this then. Is there a threshold at which things get bad enough where you would use authoritarian application to preserve what it is you call liberty or anything else?
There's always first off, you have to be careful with terms of service. So I just want to be clear here because I don't want to get the Crucible.
Sorry, I don't know.
But I will say in the hypothetical scenario, of course, you could envision scenarios where you would be willing to use authoritarianism because the situation is so dire.
Great, Rob. Okay, that's all I needed. So would you say that the creation of the ideals you love, the creation of the Constitution, is an example of that?
Yes, like the founding of our country and the sort of rebelling against.
So I find it interesting that the thing that you value, the fabric of what you value, that you now lends itself to giving women equal votes and this sort of egalitarian approach, the very founding of it, the application used is something you disagree with.
No, I think that the scenario that we had there was a unique scenario, which literally called for the direct war and revolution against a country. Do you think we're anywhere near, because you don't want women to have the right to vote, that there should be a complete revolution and civil war in this country to prevent women from voting?
Are you saying that female liberation wasn't a deliberate subversion of this country?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. It's irrelevant to the position I'm taking.
No, you're asking. No, hold on. You're saying, well, Jimbob, the Constitution was this really unique situation in which the only thing you can do is the authoritarian approach of self-declaring your own sovereignty with the threat of force, which has nothing to do with voting. It didn't require voting. Didn't even assume the egalitarian standard of not only just men against men, but certainly not men with women. But now we have to preserve. We have to preserve women voting because we're avoiding something on the precipice here. What I'm saying is that if you permit it in one instance, I'm asking you, when are you going to open your eyes to see that we're in a dire situation right now?
Because in a utilitarian framework, even if I would concede to all of this, your advocacy for openly pushing, and I assume you would want national level politicians to openly be pushing this position, particularly 50 days outside of an election, would lead to the exact inverse decisions that you want. It would cause women in droves to be enthusiastic to vote against the Republican Party, even those that would agree with many other things that Republicans or Trump would suggest, which would lead to the direct outcome of a more creeping authoritarian in the opposite way, more woke outcomes, more abortions, more censorship so that your voice couldn't be out there, which would make it less likely that the cultural changes that you say would take 4 generations to be necessary would ever be able to occur.
Well, I don't know that everything you said would just be a necessary entailment or conclusion. I'm willing to look at how it is you extrapolated that far out to know the outcome, but I don't even need to look at the outcome to know that female liberation, specifically voting, was an act against women. Like, it's actually an act against women. They know it. They're starting to figure it out, Rob. So I don't know if you have your finger on the pulse, but women are starting to go, maybe we were duped.
What percentage?
I'm not sure, but it's creeping. I can see it.
I'm obviously not going to hold you to a direct, but like, give me a ballpark.
No, it's still small.
Right.
But the fact that even if it's creeping to like 15% of the population among conservative women, like that's good. I mean, there is something called the tipping effect. You know that? You know, like
I don't think that the number is close to that.
That's fine. I'm saying that what you think is required for that to happen is so egregious to you. It's so daunting and horrific to you. I'm saying, Rob, if it was possible that the best outcome was in fact women not voting, and your own wife agreed with it, how we get there, you would agree, is separate than that being something worthy of a goal.
Sure. So
Okay.
so you could say, if I were to agree, I'm not agreeing, but if I were to agree that ultimately the best goal would be to have women not vote, right? That could be something to strive for, but it still doesn't you still have to, would you agree with this, that the pragmatism of how we get there is important? That you would not want to make decisions that... Let me rephrase it. Let me rephrase the question, just so I'm being clear. That if you have an ultimate goal that you're trying to achieve, that the real world outcomes to getting you closer to that, or to getting the best chance of that being achieved, are important. And you don't push for outcomes just like morally or deontologically
No, I understand what you're
that would
saying.
lead to the inverse.
I understand you. I don't say any outcome, any means possible. I don't take that approach, just so you know. But, however, when it comes down to it, isn't the most pragmatic tool force and the threat of force and authority?
Repeat that?
Isn't the most pragmatic way to accomplish a goal when in regards to policy, politics, governance is force? Is to acquire force?
It could be at times, but it's not always. Of course not.
Okay, but can you give me an
Do you think that right? Okay. Yeah.
Hold on. Can you give me an instance of a kind of governance that you support that shares your ideals that isn't entirely buttressed by the threat of force and
but
authority?
That's a different question entirely to what. Yes, it seemed to be the question you asked previously was, if you're trying to get a goal, the most pragmatic or the most useful way to do so would be through force. And then when I say, no, I don't always agree with that, you say, but can you give me a government system that's not backed up by force? Those are two completely different questions.
No, here's the thing, though. Like, was the application and the declaration that people had rights, was that a choice for human beings? They attributed those rights to?
Yes.
It was?
Wait. I don't understand the question.
Okay, so government declares you guys have rights.
Okay.
If I'm someone who says, no, I don't, and they say, you don't have a choice, I'm enforcing that you have rights. Do you agree with that?
Do I agree that the government should have the ability to do that? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. If there's a group of people you can call a government, right, that declare for their entire nation, like the Napoleonic Code or something, right, that they declare via authority, hierarchy, down to the people. They say, you now have rights. If someone goes, no, I don't want that, right? Are they not under authoritarian control and application?
Well,
The thing that you're avoiding.
I would say that the best case for your scenario here is that it's a paradox. It's of the parable of like, can God create a rock that he can't lift? I would say that they still have rights even if they deny the ability that they have that right, because they have the right to deny that they have the right, which in itself is a right.
So, okay. So the thing is, if it's the case that you're in a paradox, I think it's an actual contradiction, not just a paradox, is that if you say, well, we got to avoid authority, right? We got to try to avoid authority. Now, let's say things were just going fine and there was no dire situation, and a monarch or governance said, they just said, listen, I declare it so, you guys have these rights. And everyone, and a bunch of people said, no, I don't want these rights. You can't force these rights on me. You're saying, I'm not sure what your answer is, like, because that instance, you're actually accepting that as an authoritarian application while rejecting a different outcome using the same exact application.
No, I think that there's a misunderstanding of what I would be constituting as right. So the exact right that we're talking about here is the right to vote. So if I say, Jimbob, you have the right to vote, and you say, I disagree, I don't have the right to vote, I say, that's fine, you don't have to vote. You could choose not to exercise that right. I'm just saying, as the government that has authority, you have the right to have your voice heard in this format that we call voting. If you choose to say, I don't have that right, therefore I choose to not exercise it, in effect, you have achieved what your goal is, because your problem would presumably be you don't think you should vote. You've solved that by not voting, but you can't say that I'm authoritarian by giving you the choice to vote if you want.
Rob, was it not an authoritarian measure to implement the 19th Amendment on women who the majority of which disagreed with it?
No.
Why not?
Even if they disagree, it's not authoritarian just if people vote for something that other people disagree with. It's not necessarily authoritarian. It only becomes authoritarian if the government is restricting people's ability to do things that they otherwise wanted to do. Those women were wanting to restrict other people's ability to do something that they wanted to do. So that's why it wouldn't be authoritarian.
Yeah, but to get the vote, they had to restrict the referendums.
That's authoritarian then. That's authoritarian.
Right.
If they did through authoritarian means, that's different.
But I'm saying that the suffrage movement used authoritarian means to get this to pass. They blocked women from showing up to vote against their own vote.
That's but listen, those are two different questions. The first is a hypothetical of if women don't want women to have the right to vote, but the vote comes out that women have the right to vote, was that authoritarian against those women? No. The second scenario is, but the way this occurred practically was they had to cheat. They had to physically bar certain women from being able to vote. Yes, that action, that forcing the women to not be able to vote against the right to vote, is itself an authoritarian action. But that's different than what we're talking about now. The historical nature of how it came about is different than the debate we're having, which is twofold at this point. One is, ought women have the right to vote, not how did it come into effect? And the second is advocating for these positions not only hurting all sorts of important issues because it'll drive women to vote against MAGA, populism, etc., but is it also detrimental to the very goal that you've set of getting women to not vote?
Guys, gentlemen, I actually have to wrap the debate there and get into closing statements. The reason is because you have time for closing statements, and then we have to get to everything else in the show. There's still going to be plenty more debate to go. It's just that this portion of it is going to be closed after the closing statements, and we'll allow super chats, caller participation, all that stuff. Now, Rob, you did open first, right? So because of that, I'm going to give you the last close. Okay. So, Jimbob, I'm going to give you the first close. Go ahead.
Sure. I'm glad Rob showed up. I'm glad he engaged with the argument that I laid out, the syllogism. I think that based on his cross-examination, I'm actually going to go back to the drawing board because I do have to make the distinction between a particular instance and a macro instance. Now, I did come to the conclusion that something like voting or upholding people's rights or some sort of justice system, it is fully dependent on a collective body of enforcement and primarily of men. And the fact that the same body of enforcement made up of women would be inadequate. Now, Rob says it is adequate that you could get a bunch of women to completely swap with men and uphold the rule of law, law and order. I think that's demonstrably false. All you have to do is look at a bunch of footage of female cops getting literally flipped on their head by homeless people. Now you just extrapolate that out, it's going to be a disaster. As far as the paradigm itself, I think the paradox that I exposed is that even Rob's view, there's ultimately a threshold in which authoritarianism is justified, because the very notion of the Constitution was just that. It was men with guns stating the fact about reality, declaring it so, and willing to die and enforce it with the use of guns. There was no women around doing that. They wouldn't say, wait a second, do you think we should get Sally to vote on this? No, that's not how shit happens. That's not how shit's defended. That's not how shit's taken. Basically, you need men all the time. I think I demonstrated basically wholesale that even if you tried to equalize men and women with technology, you're still relying on men to create the technology. So is it really equal? If you give women the right to vote, the right to do this and the right to do that, if it's completely enforced by men collectively, do they really have those rights? Well, the answer is no. You could just take them away. They gave the Iranian women rights to vote and other things, and they were like, well, that was a mistake. Rights don't really exist. Now, if we got into it, metaphysics itself would be another defeater, I think, is because Rob couldn't actually execute an argument or a demonstration that showed me that rights exist. They'd merely be the privileges allotted to people, whether or not individuals or groups of people or classes, based on force. Based on men with force saying, you get this, you don't get this. That's just if he finds that unfortunate about reality, I don't know where he's going to go, because that same reality of men with guns and force, the threat of force, is the exact thing that maintains his illusion of liberty that he has right now. Everything he values, everything he loves about the United States, freedom, guns, it's all buttressed wholly by the will and the strength of men who are willing to die, get hurt, or kill to maintain that as a status quo. The idea that women have something to offer in the exchange called voting, which I established is a forfeiting of immediate brute force in exchange for latent brute force, at the tail end of policy. Now, if the man is trading their immediate brute force, whether it's collective or individual, to fight against the government, and they're exchanging that force for another type of force, I couldn't get a straight answer from Rob as what is it the woman is actually exchanging in that transaction. I don't think it's a fair transaction. She has nothing to offer. She's allotted protection. She's allotted privileges, and she has no obligation to defend them because she can't. Now, the determination that some chick with a gun could fight off a robber is not the same thing as a bunch of women getting together and overtaking a male government and replacing it somehow. It's impossible. You'll never show it to me, even with the best video game style bombs and drones. It's not going to happen. Lastly, I would say that I find it paradoxical that, just go back to it, that Rob himself runs a nation. It's called his house. We love him for it. Rob is based in his house. We love him for that. Rob runs his household from a patriarchal view, from a hierarchical view. What he says goes. It's not equal. It's not equal. He's not going to do a vote. He's not going to drop little voting things in the little laundry chute and go and have the kid check it out and count the votes. No, what Rob says goes in his house, and his wife loves that about him. Now, we just have to convince women that that's what they really want, because they were confused, okay? Now, getting women to not vote anymore, I agree with Rob. It's actually most likely going to be a persuasive propaganda machine that does that. However, if it's necessary, I would use force. And I think so would Rob. We just have different thresholds of when we decide time is time, okay? He wants to preserve the illusion of freedom and egalitarianism, even though it's a complete lie. He wants to defend Enlightenment values, right? He wants to defend the Constitution. He wants to defend all these things. They're all withering away because you're letting women who have a false sense of status vote. They're literally tearing apart everything you call liberty through their voting. And it's not enough for you, right? I don't know when it's going to be enough, but unfortunately for Rob, it'd probably be too late if we all took his approach to this problem. With that, I do appreciate Rob coming. We gave a good show. Andrew, thanks for the inviting me back on to do this, and thanks for everyone watching. I really appreciate the engagement and stuff. And
of course. Now, Rob, it's time for your closing. Go ahead when you're ready.
All right. I'll try to do this sort of in the inverse order that we talk. So let me talk first about, I think that this is a topic, particularly 50 days from election, that I'm hesitate to broach. I really enjoy Jimbob and Andrew. I'm more than happy to do this debate. But I think in general times, talking about these sorts of things could harm people in the party that's advocating for these sort of stuff, and rightfully so. You could understand by a large group of the electorate being told we're going to try to enforce policies that you're no longer allowed to vote would persuade them to vote for the other side. So I think it's a huge mistake that Republicans, conservative populists make all the time, where they have infighting on these grandiose issues like this instead of trying to kick the ball in the back of the net and get pragmatic victories in real time. I think that it's quite evident that pushing these things, that at best case scenario, including according to Jimbob, would be 50 years to be able to start to actualize, that by pushing for this sort of stuff now and wanting it to be pushed at a higher level and focusing on it is a grievous mistake. You need to be able to persuade in legitimate and authentic ways over decades to have something like this actually come to fruition, and just coming out and starting off with, no, you shouldn't have the right to vote, you basically don't have anything to offer, I think is a huge mistake. So I cannot stress enough, even if I can't convince you of the rest of the stuff that I'm going to say, maybe it's time to put this issue on the back burner for the next 60 days, because I think it's doing a huge disservice to not only getting Trump and other MAGA politicians or populist politicians elected, but it's deflecting from the actual issues that will be so important to achieve the goals that people like Jimbob would want in the first place. Because once we have internet censorship, authoritarianism, we're in World War III, etc., we aren't going to have 40 years to convince people to do this stuff as Jimbob would like to see. Now, going to the first part, the argument that we used the syllogism and the framework that Jimbob wanted to say why people don't have liberty. I think that it's an interesting syllogism, and we hyper-focused on the first part of it. And the reason for this being because if any part of this falls apart, then it falls apart totally. And he says that my understanding in my foundational worldview that I'm a minimalist with the government, and I think we should prioritize, even though I'm not a complete anarcho-capitalist, I think we should prioritize as the default giving people individual liberty and individual freedom. He says that women can't have that liberty because sovereignty is necessary for that sovereignty, and you can only have sovereignty if you could adequately self-actualize force to be able to defend your sovereignty. And I think that I proved all throughout this that this was problematic for various reasons. One, he uses a totalitarian collective approach where he says that we judge people based on an immutable characteristic such as sex. And I have a huge problem with that, because I think that if we're going to do something like this, which I wouldn't agree with doing it anyways, but I'm open to the debate, and it's more persuasive to do so in a meritocracy type way. So if you want to say we have some sort of test that you have to achieve before you're able to vote, I don't have much of a problem as that is saying, no, because you were born a certain sex, you could no longer have the right to vote, because even if there are exceptions where you could self-actualize force, we say as a collective, women can't. I think that that is incredibly detrimental and incredibly a bad way to run things, and it's easy to see how this, with the wrong sorts of government intact, could quickly run out of control. And even if we take the pragmatic approach of, well, yeah, but it would require force for anyone to do that anyways, I think that the moral approach would still be incorrect in this sense. We should not be telling people that they aren't allowed to have a voice in the way this country is governed just because they are born a certain sex. I think that's a big mistake. Secondly, even if we accept the definition of self-actualization of force, I think that you can see that Jimbob hasn't thought this through totally, and I think that there's this sort of archaic view, and I'm still not getting it, that because men are physically stronger, that proves that women wouldn't be able to defend themselves. That's disproven empirically all the time, because we have things like firearm where women are able to defend themselves and do so various times. We could see examples of it. Maybe not as much as men, maybe if they don't have those weapons as well as men, but they're certainly able to defend themselves and their property. It also takes out of account that there are men that are incapable of doing that as well. And so it just, to me, it seems like he hasn't thought this through, and I still haven't got an answer as to why, if just because someone that was biologically a man created a gun, then a man that had nothing to do with that creation of that gun, who uses that gun, that's him using self-actualization of force. But a woman who didn't create the gun, who uses that same gun in that same situation, is not actually self-actualizing force. And he immediately defaults to, yeah, but what about militaries, women military, men militaries? Even on that front, I think you can see that with technology, that there are women that are in positions that would be able to be competent, that would be able to defend themselves. I mean, we're getting to almost a computer geek type military. There will always be a need for grunts. That's totally true. But as the war in Ukraine, Russia proves, there's so many horrific events where some nerd with a drone could actually wipe out many infantry people that would be physically stronger. And there would certainly be women that would be capable of doing that. All of that's irrelevant anyways, because what happens is in this debate, and I really enjoyed this conversation, I did, and I appreciate that it got spirited. I think we're fucking dudes, we're men. That's how it should be. You're not here to hold each other's hands. You should go at each other hard. So I'm very pleased with how it went. I really am. But we didn't get to talk about sort of my theory and my sort of issues that I had. We spent so much time on sort of the idea of self-actualization, adequate self-actualization of force. Women certainly contribute a lot. I think it's erroneous to say that only if someone has the ability to defend themselves should they have a say in voting, because it requires a use of force to protect what our government does. There are all sorts of things you could contribute. For example, you could contribute money. If you're a woman born here, you're still forced to pay taxes. That's your labor that you're putting in. And why shouldn't you have a voice then? And even aside from that, when he talks about like, well, men are the ones that are fighting and women won't, I could speak directly to me. The only way that I'm able to sit here and talk to you all right now is because my wife is taking an unfair burden of the labor in our household by being a fantastic mother right now. Her job is more important and more difficult than what I do. So even when it comes to soldiers, how effective would military forces be? We all want a society where people are procreating and having families. If you didn't have that woman raising that child that enabled that man to go off and to fight and to go off and to protect, so that woman is sacrificing something. And it's not that we're individual, like, although I am arguing for individualization, I think that the family unit is the most important thing. And I think that when a man dies in war, although it's easy to flippantly say, clearly that's the biggest sacrifice, the heartbreak that women that sent their loved ones off and sacrificed sending their husband, the father of their child off, that's also a sacrifice that they're making. So the idea that they shouldn't have any say, to me, is completely erroneous. Lastly, I'll say about the idea of how I run my house. Listen, I try to run my house in a partnership. There are clear, defined roles that we have in our family, and I think that my wife would admit that we follow many of those roles that you've seen, but I don't think it's near to the level that Jimbob's giving this impression that I'm some like iron fist fascist that's telling my wife everything she has to do.
You will
So
be.
I just want to make that clear, so people don't get the wrong impression of it. So at the end of the day, I think that although it's an interesting argument, I will agree that I think women disproportionately vote in ways that I'm not favorable to. I think that women should have the right to vote. We should convince them that traditional cultural family values are the most important things, and maybe they should vote in similar directions to how their husbands are doing. I think maybe a little weakness on the people's part that are saying that women shouldn't vote. Maybe you don't have your house in order. Maybe you're not convincing your loved one, your spouse, to vote in the way that they should be. But all joking aside, I think that that's the better way to go, because I don't think that there's pragmatically a way that we're even remotely close to getting women to not vote. I think that attempts to push there will drive women away in droves, which will make the voting situation even worse and these problems even worse. I think that using immutable characteristics to tell people that they don't have rights, such as the right to vote or right to have a say in the country, is a huge mistake. I think it's belittling women's role. I don't think that the only thing that should matter is your ability to defend yourself or your ability to defend the country, because we all have pivotal roles, and the most pivotal role that I could think of is a good mother that's raising children, and she's sacrificing her children and husbands as well when they go off to die in war. So for all of these reasons, I think that we should instead, if we're going to have any barrier to voting, it should be same-day voting, unless with rare exceptions of people that are serving our military overseas and can't make it there or have medical conditions, what they don't. And I think that we should instead be pushing the values that people like Jimbob do so great articulating over and over. I don't agree with this portion of what he's saying, but the values of Christian ethics, of raising a family, of being good fathers, of having defined roles, of being a provider, and of women being great mothers. I think that that's how we win, and that's how we wake more and more women up to not only one day maybe having them agree in number that we shouldn't have the right to vote, but more importantly to that, even if they have the right to vote, which I would welcome them still having the right to vote, they will vote in ways that will be great for this country and for all individuals, because we will win that cultural battle that shows that the way we should run this country and raise our children is one through the ethics that we talk about regularly here.
All right, guys. Thanks for those closing statements. Thanks for the spirited debate. With the closing statements done, we do consider the debate over. However, we do things a little bit differently here at the Crucible. When the debaters are done, the closing statements are done, I take notes throughout the debate, and I tend to cross-examine debaters a tiny bit myself before I start bringing on callers and getting to super chats. I have a few questions that I've written down for each. I'd like to start with you, Jimbob. A point came up about two alien species which come down, and one finds all of the guns and dominates the other alien species with the guns. And you said that that was not actualized force, but that doesn't actually make any sense to me. For instance, if a caveman found a stick on the ground, they would be able to actualize force with that stick. They certainly didn't invent the stick. They didn't do anything for the stick. They just found it, right? They just found it on the ground. But they're definitely can actualize force with that stick, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, actually, I don't recall. I don't know if he made the alien thing and then he shifted to what he was making the analogy to. And
you said quote, no, they wouldn't be actualizing the force if they didn't invent the guns.
Well, I granted Rob later that you could look at an instance where someone has a weapon, and in that instance, they're actualizing what they have available to them, right? So I granted that to Rob. So I would grant that with the alien. I don't actually remember the alien thing. I just remember thinking, in the end, right, whoever has the guns, right, we're looking at it over time. So like over time, let's say we grant the aliens that they found the guns, right? Well, let's say they run out of the guns, right? If they don't know how to make the guns, who's gonna be superior? The ones who make the guns, or the one who used the gun once, but over time they run out of the guns, right? So even in that instance, it doesn't matter in the end, because we're talking about ultimately ongoing governance, right, or warfare. So in that example, like if you granted women, they found a bunch of tanks and they don't know how they got there. Sure, in that instance, they could actualize what they have, right? But I don't think it was a good counter Rob produced, because it made me look at, okay, what is the actual argument here? It's really at a wider scale of ongoing time. And if that's the case, the reality is that if women, in this case, the aliens, found all the guns, yeah, they could utilize what they were given, but they can't make the things again, right? And neither can the aliens, perhaps. So in that case, there's going to be a time frame in which the men who created the guns, who the women luckily walked upon in the woods, they're going to be superior when it comes down to it, right? If it's a war. And that's the point.
And not rebuttals yet. When you guys get to callers, you guys can go back and forth. But let me get through my questions here very quickly.
Can I say real quick, like this bidding war?
You can't say real quick.
I was just gonna say the bidding war going on here. I can sit here all night and watch this go on.
Yeah, well,
with the donations.
We have a fantastic and phenomenal argument. And by the way, silent counters with 300. But so he says, Rob, this is my question. Rob, how do you make the justification that our founders gave us all the rights you appeal to without voting rights? They had no voting rights. Why is voting enshrined as a freedom that you believe in when it has nothing to do with the inalienable rights that you appeal to? In fact, it was a bunch of, you could say, totalitarian people in charge of the nation who then dictated that you had these inalienable rights. Certainly nobody voted for them.
Voting is a mechanism. It would be a more peaceful mechanism, and you would want to use the least sort of physically violent or the least aggressive mechanisms to achieve the goal. And the goal that the Founding Fathers were primarily trying to achieve is that they should have a say in how the government that they were under was ran, right? And so, we had all sorts of, the Founding Fathers were upset about taxation, and they were upset about the quartering of troops and being forced to do all sorts of things. So it got to the point where they felt they didn't have a voice, they didn't have an ability to vote, so they took the mechanism that they thought was most useful to them, which was having a revolution where they fought for these things. They enshrined in there at least the idea of voting, as most governments that aren't completely dictatorial have, because that is a mechanism that achieves what they thought was the spirit of what they were trying to achieve, was giving people a voice. Now, is that mechanism itself the only way that people could have a voice in their government? No. Clearly we see what they did was they decided to have a revolution. But I'm saying in the normal day-to-day operations of a government, it should be the bare minimum that the people have some sort of voice. And the mechanism that we're utilizing right now is voting. Jimbob and the plan to take away women's voting, when voting hypothetically is one of the mechanisms of how we have a voice, would effectively take women's voice away from engaging into this process, which I'm against.
Okay. Was piggybacking off of that, all of your rights came from rulers and not from the people. When the people vote, especially women, they vote your rights away, and your tyrants are the ones who give you the rights. The Magna Carta, given to you by what you would consider tyrants. Napoleonic Code, given to you by tyrants. The U.S. Constitution, given to you by tyrants. Voting seems to erode the very principles, again, which you're appealing to. That's what I don't understand. All of the rights which you want to see enshrined as inalienable, it's seemingly voting has done everything it can to erode them, not expand them.
Well, not necessarily everything, but certainly you could say that there are
Can
a lot
you
of
name
things.
one? I
Sure.
can't even think of one that voting has expanded.
Sure, I would think that voting's expanded my rights to. Let me think. I guess you got to be difficult because I can't use the Bill of Rights, right? Because you would argue that that wasn't the result of voting. But
and those are the rights you're appealing to that was given to you by dictators, right?
But it was people that were appointed through some sort of means that people elected, that people go to negotiate how this Constitution would be written, and then those individuals, in truly a Republican or a Republic sense, voted and had discussions and agreements on how that Bill of Rights and how that Constitution would be written. But there are things that we vote on, like for example, you could say that some of the decisions in Florida here to vote to get back some of the rights, such as
because they were already eroded, right?
Well, it depends. You could say that.
What right do you think voting has done anything to actually preserve versus eroding over time? So if you were to make the comparison of this right was strengthened through voting over time versus eroded over time, which one would it be?
Well, but that's the nature of government in itself. So the larger that government gets, whether it be a dictatorship or elsewise, inevitably what's going to happen is you will get less freedoms. So the argument would be then over time, if we started off where we were just a collection of farmers that got together once in a while, and then we progressed through the Articles of Confederation that had more of a federalist mindset, then we progressed to the Constitution, you could say, well, yeah, you could see once we gave that government more authoritarian and more federal control that you ended up losing rights. And so there's a give and flow where sometimes voting takes more of those rights away, sometimes voting retrieves some of those rights. But isn't it true as a whole, since the start of voting in this country, that people have less freedoms than they did initially? Yes, but I wouldn't say that's
not what I'm asking. I'm asking, isn't it true that since people have been able to vote, they have voted more frequently to erode rights rather than vote to preserve them?
I don't think that that's necessarily always the case, right?
What? Well, okay, so tell me the right in which that is not the case.
Right to vote.
What?
A right to vote.
I just want to make sure I got this right. So the only right that people have been preserving and not eroding through their vote is the right to do the thing itself, which is eroding all of the other rights which you appeal to.
Well, no,
Doesn't
I don't
that
think
sound paradoxical to you?
It may sound paradoxical, but that is one right. So, for example, when we look at such as slaves, right, the freeing of the slaves, before people voted on it, we had slaves. The slaves
people didn't vote on it.
People didn't vote on what?
On slavery.
Sure, they did.
No, they didn't.
They didn't. They voted for the politicians that ended up passing.
Yeah, but they didn't vote on slavery. What happened was an amendment was passed, just like with the 19th Amendment. Amendment was passed.
Who passed the amendment?
Yeah, nobody voted.
Who passed the amendment?
Which amendment?
Who passed the amendment that freed the slaves?
Yeah, the government.
Right.
Yeah, the government.
Okay, and how did that government get put in place? Did people vote for them?
No,
That's not true. It's
in fact, like pre-vote, how would people have voted that government in to give them the right to vote?
No, but it's erroneous what you're saying. You're saying that there wasn't a direct ballot initiative, therefore it wasn't direct democracy, therefore they didn't vote. That's not how our system works.
It was how the system worked. It is true. People could not. How could people have voted when they didn't have the right to vote, Rob? That doesn't make any sense.
Now, let me be clear what you're suggesting here. So you're saying that if something gets passed into law that wasn't directly voted on by the people, but was instead voted on by their politicians, their congressmen and senators.
Who they didn't vote for.
Who didn't vote for?
Who the people didn't vote for because they didn't have the right to vote.
So the blacks didn't vote, the slaves didn't vote, but
No,
other people voted.
You're conflating two different things now. I'm talking about the right to vote itself.
Okay.
The right to vote itself, pre the right to vote. How were these politicians getting into office? It wasn't because people voted them in.
But when you asked me, name me a situation where voting's led to more freedom, and I said the freeing of the slaves and giving them the right to vote, you said
that was not direct, that was not people voting. That was,
yes, it was
the government which was voting, and that was through conquest, by the way.
But that government was voted on by the people, and then when I point that out, you deflect.
Except
back
for
to,
the government that was voted on by the people who they conquered, right? Well, who said no, we want this, right?
Well, that's fine. There were people that voted in the opposite way. It came down to force the freeing of the slaves. Ultimately, that it came down to a military conquest, but not the right to vote for the slaves. That's not,
I know. I understand what you're saying, but here's the thing. Again, I'm asking to the initial appeal to these 10 amendments, which are the things you're appealing to as being inalienable, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. What has voting done to strengthen those?
Again, I'm saying for certain groups of people, it has done some. I think that there have been, certainly you could make the argument, and I think this is absolutely true, that like take the First Amendment. Have we gotten to a situation where the way people vote have led to more restrictions on the First Amendment? Yeah, I think that's the case. Now, there is differences in how the First Amendment's interpreting today. In some senses, it's more loose than it used to be in the past. Things like libel laws and things like that used to be enforced more strictly. But it's certainly true. You could make the argument that the direction that people have voted, we've slowly and sometimes fastly been curtailing free speech. That's ultimately true. But I don't think that's a result of the mechanism of voting necessarily, but more a result of people not using their vote wisely and authoritarians that actually have that use of force. They could have achieved the same outcome not through voting, but through use of force and just said,
well, then how come on the local referendums they still vote when it's direct towards eroding those things, and that has nothing to do with the government now? So if you're going to make this kind of appeal, well, no, you're voting in politicians and giving the government more power, and the government's eroding it. We have local referendums all the time on things, including gun laws and many other restrictions. Why is it you think that people still vote to erode those freedoms when it's direct? They always do, almost. In fact, I can't even think of an instance where they don't.
Sure, there's been direct referendums that I'm aware of things like communal farming and taking away restrictions on the ability for farmers to sell certain products.
Those have nothing to do with your 10 rights, though, that you would appeal to. Right?
But then tell me the ballot initiatives that have to do with the Bill of Rights that you're talking about.
The Second Amendment would be one. First Amendment would be one.
Give me an example.
Well, here's a First Amendment restriction. Could be various books in schools. It could be all sorts of different things, and those things are constantly put up as restrictions. Just not being able to walk around naked would be a restriction.
Give me the ballot initiative, though. Give me an example of the ballot initiative where that's been on the ballot.
What, for the restrictions?
Like you can't walk around naked. Where was that ballot initiative?
No. You can look. Well, actually, I can pull up a ton of different ballots on the local referendums for restrictions on First Amendment activities. Getting a fucking permit would be a restriction on a First Amendment activity, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you saying that that's not the case? That there's local referendums on these things all the time?
Sure, there are local referendums. I was just reading a story the other day that there was a local referendum that eliminated.
So what the hell what are you talking about?
But again, it's not universal like you're saying. I just read one the other day where there was a local referendum on HOAs that were restricting people's rights to have farm animals like chickens to raise eggs.
You don't have a right to own a fucking chicken.
But listen,
there's no right to own a chicken.
Initiative, that local direct democracy initiative rolled back the restrictions and gave people more freedom in that instance. So again, I think the problem you're isolating isn't a problem with voting. I think it's a problem with the people that have the power, primarily through their influence financially and through the use of force, convincing people to use their voice unwisely. And how would you recommend we get out of that other than force or convincing people to use some sort of mechanism to take back control of their government through things like electing
birth rates?
Well, but you would say, but that's not, you still need a mechanism, right? Like just having birth rates, you need to have enough people to then do what? Vote their way out of it? Fight their way out of it?
No. The system may collapse on its own without you having to do much. It's very, very interesting how that works. When you have the kind of these crises which come from population. So I'm trying not to get into like a drug out debate here. I'd like to.
Yeah, I know. We can talk we can debate some other time. I'm cool with it.
But here's my next question for you. And this is my last one, and then I'm going to start bringing on callers. Rob, you say that there's a huge percentage of women, probably the overwhelming majority of women, who would be against you, especially in election year, try and take away the right to vote. I would agree with this. I'd say that the percentage of women who would be for this might be less than 2%, right? And I would say that that's probably even estimating it kind of high, right? However, that isn't that a reflection of the pro-suffragette numbers, where the percentage was also extraordinarily low, and yet they were still able to pass this via an amendment with influence inside of Congress and the House of Representatives, and then later the courts, right? So just because you don't have the political will, the same thing with abortion, nobody did a direct vote on this. The Supreme Court just rolled it back, right? So isn't it a bad argument to say just because a small percentage of people support this, that means that you can't have a rollback, because clearly you can?
No, for two reasons. Because one, it discounts the time frame argument that I'm making, that those sorts of things like a court rolling back or something like that would take time to do. We're not going to accomplish that in the next 50 days in this election that I think will be important. So it doesn't answer that part of my criticism. Secondly, the reason that stuff was able to happen because there was institutional control that willed suffrage of women, as you well know. And as Jimbob articulated, many of the tools they used were authoritarian, corrupt, and
just industrialists, man.
Okay.
There wasn't really government. There wasn't really government institutional control the same way that you're talking about.
Okay. So then explain to me how, if the majority of people in positions of institutional power weren't for women's suffrage, and the majority of women were against women's suffrage, and the majority of voters were against women's suffrage, how then this small minority was able to accomplish?
The Supreme Court just reinterpreted what was there. That's how.
But that's because they were people with institutional control that did that, correct? The Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, the Supreme Court. Well, yes. No, that's called a rogue court.
Okay, but they have institutional power to be able to affect a great amount of policy, correct?
Yeah, but so what? That's not really that you have these unelected officials inside of a rogue court
preaching to the choir, man. Yeah,
make a ruling on something. Sounds extraordinarily authoritative to me. Sounds
Agreed.
Authoritarian, right?
Yes, agreed. What I'm saying is you don't have that on the inverse. So when you say, well, it doesn't matter if we have the political will of women if it's only 2%, because look, this happened before. Okay, so do we have corrupt authoritarian Supreme Court justices that are going to come out this week or this year and say, actually, we're taking away women's right to vote? What do you think the chances of that happening are? 0.000001. So no, I don't think the analogy applies at all.
No, I mean, I think it does. I don't see how it doesn't. Just saying that you have a small amount of people who support X thing does not mean that you cannot get X thing moved by the political tact of the resources that you have, or we would never have the rollback of abortion.
That's true in the abstract, but the specific example you give would require a corrupt Supreme Court that wanted to, by fiat, create some sort of law. My question to you is, okay, if that analogy applies, can you tell me which 5 justices are anywhere near rolling back women's rights to vote? You couldn't have told
me which 5 justices were anywhere near rolling back Roe v. Wade.
Okay, let me.
Every one of those justices sat in front of Congress during their confirmation hearing and said they weren't going to. They all said they weren't going to, and then they fucking did it anyway. They all said Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. We're not going to do anything about it. You fucking know it. You watched the same confirmation hearings that I did, and they did it anyway. You saying, well, they're not on record saying they'd roll back the 19th doesn't mean fucking shit. Doesn't mean shit. They're not on record saying they would roll back Roe v. Wade, Rob.
Okay, one, despite the fact that they weren't on record saying they'd roll back Roe v. Wade, many people correctly predicted which justices would be more amenable to it, despite the fact what they said in front of Congress.
I can correctly predict which justices I think would be more amenable to it, Rob.
But there was actually... be as honest...
wouldn't be very amenable to it.
Be as honest as possible. When the Dobbs decision was put in front of the court, what % chance did you give that it would overturn Roe?
I didn't think I'd see Roe v. Wade overturned in my lifetime ever.
But once that decision was there in front of this court with these people, did you think it was like a 0% chance or like a 10% chance?
I thought it was a 0%, really, to be honest with you.
Well, I completely disagree.
Maybe 1 or 2%. I never thought that they would roll it back.
I thought it was 20. All I could do is appeal to people to try to be objective about this. I think there was a far greater chance that this court could overturn Roe v. Wade than they're going to take away women's right to vote. There is no chance of that occurring. Everyone who's looking at this remotely honestly could see that. So I don't think your analogy applies, because you're going to require the will of the people or the will of people in positions of power.
I think he would have sat there, right, in 1920 and said, I don't think that there's any fucking way they're going to give women the right to vote.
That might
I
be
think
true.
it would have been the same exact
they
argument in reverse. There's no fucking way they're going to give women the right to vote. There's no fucking way. Name a politician who's for it. Name a justice who's for it. Name a state that really wants this. You would have been in the exact same
I don't think that's
position.
true. I bet there were people that were predicting that could happen, and it was something that was a cascading effect that happened. But let me ask you this question real quick. Do you agree, take the Supreme Court out of it, do you agree that the people in positions of power that you would think would be corrupt want women to continue to have the right to vote?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
So if those people that are controlling the country in that way institutionally want women to have the right to vote, and women predominantly, you say maybe at best 2% would be against women's right to vote, what is the mechanism that would be used to roll back women's right to vote?
Well, in this particular case, you could use grassroots pressure. That's been applied in the past to great effect. And you don't need, the nice thing about having voting blocks is you only need, once again, to have a voting block that's just in a majority to the opposition. That's it. Even if it's very unpopular, all you really need is to have it popular enough with men and women. You could get it passed. And I got to tell you, every year it becomes a much more popular position than it did the year before.
And it's still less than 1 to 2% in your estimation. And I agree with Jimbob's time frame. I don't disagree with
It
you.
could be less than one. Well, no, hang on. Less than 1 to 2% of women.
Right.
But here's what I will say. I will say that most of the same women who you would be trying to appeal to in order to vote Republican this term, who would not be for the rollback of the 19th Amendment, are still going to be voting fucking Democrat. Let's be real.
It'd be like 65%, something like that. But you're talking about
probably like 75%. If
Okay,
a man,
even if that's
man
true.
is for repealing the 19th and is married, his wife probably is too.
Okay, but again, two things to say on that. Still, the numbers would be vastly bigger, as you admit, if this became a central issue. Second, there would be a lot of men that would be voting Republican that would be against this, so you would lose some men as well. And third, this is the exact argument that I think Jimbob was making, that you need some sort of grassroots cultural movements. He estimates it would take 4 generations or 50 years. I agree with that, and even though I don't want your ultimate goal of women not being able to vote, I think if that's a goal you want to achieve, then coming out guns a-blazing like this does the exact opposite of it. You're not going to have a rogue Supreme Court that says women no longer have the right to vote and everyone just goes, ah, shucks. It's pie in the sky dream. You're going to have to convince people, and it's going to take years and years to do that. So coming out guns blazing like this makes that less likely to occur.
Maybe not. It's hard to say. Politics is very strange, but I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to start bringing on our callers.
Do you mind if I go real quick to the
restroom?
My old man bladder.
I can't bring the callers till you get back, so...
Well, go ahead. Maybe they have a question.
Go ahead. No, go to the bathroom. Go to the bathroom.
Thank you.
Jeez. And what we can do is we can get to some of these big-ass super chats that came in from the great supporters here at the Crucible. A couple of them that needed to be highlighted again in this bid war of madness. And by the way, I know you guys said, YouTube won't let us make the donos anymore. That's what Dono Chat is there for. Noah sent in a huge 200. Silent responds with 300. And before that, they were in a massive bidding war for 50 here, 60 there, 50 there, 60 there. Hell of a bid war that was going on, right?
Hey, Andrew, I think people are saying your gain is up a little. I hear it too, just a tiny bit.
My gain?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, hang on. I can turn my camera down a little bit here, or my microphone down a little bit. There we go. That should probably be a bit better.
Yeah, that's good.
I wasn't able to equalize the mics before everybody came on because some asshole came on late. Fucking some jerk off came on.
I wish
late.
there was a good excuse, like I was doing like shotguns or something, but nope. Just fucking haunted by tech.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I would have thought.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I would have thought for sure, Rob, that at the time, I think that you as a commentator would have thought at the time that that the Supreme Court would have definitely struck it down as being unconstitutional, but they didn't, right? Rogue court.
Maybe.
So
gay marriage is a
maybe.
better example, to be honest. That court's insane, but
Yeah. Well, let's bring on some callers here. So one of them I happen to be boning, so I'm going to let her come on first, right? Because she has executive privilege, as they say.
Erudite, how's it go? Oh shit! Sorry, I'm sorry.
Oh goodness! Hello.
That was a
everyone.
good joke. Wow, that was good.
That
What's
was
up, Ray?
pretty
How's it
funny.
going?
Pretty funny, Rob. Okay, so I'm going to try not to drag this out. The first thing I want to say is that Rob defeated himself in his closing argument by correctly pointing out that we had better hush up about this subject. We had better not let the women hear us talking about it, because if we do, the first thing they'll do is use their tyrannical female voting power to prevent us from using our First Amendment rights. They'll kick us off the internet and they won't let us talk anymore. And he has every right to be afraid of female tyranny, since women are historically responsible for the expansion of government in all areas, especially concerning social welfare by a large margin, with that social welfare accounting for over 60% of the voting gap between men and women. So if you want small government, Rob, the very best way to make sure you'll never have it again is to let every woman vote. Now, second point real quick is that you were talking about, immutable characteristics, that you don't think women should be excluded simply based on sex because they can't change that. Do you believe that every woman should be obligated to sign up for the draft at age 18?
No.
Why not?
Because I think, and I tried to answer this earlier, but I think that there is a difference. Giving someone a positive right that says you have a right to have your voice heard in government is different than the purpose of a draft, which is in emergency situations. Right.
So you're fine with discriminating against men based on an immutable characteristic, i.e. making them sign up for the draft at age 18 just because they are male, even though they can't change that?
Well, no, because I think that in general, yes, but let me articulate, there would be certain specific incidents, such as a male's inability through health reasons, whatever. If they can't, I'm not saying that we should take any paraplegic and throw them into the front lines, but I'm saying there is a difference between saying that someone should have the right to vote or a right to have input in the government, because they're putting things into the government as well, such as their taxation, their labor, their raising of children, their giving away of their fathers and their husbands. They're sacrificing things in that as well. That's different than a pragmatic solution to needing a draft.
We can send people to die based on their sex. That's fine. Okay,
correct.
Got that. That clears that up for me. And then the final thing I just wanted to mention was, we've talked a lot about voting rights, but this was supposed to be about women's lib in general. And I wonder, Rob, if you are aware of the outcomes of almost 100 years of women's liberation. Let me just give you a couple of them real quick. If you look at just numbers, everybody loves numbers. Back in 1960, 72% of all American adults were married. Today, that number is only 50%. In 1960, out-of-wedlock births only accounted for 5% of all births. Today, that number is 41%. Welfare spending in 1950, adjusted for inflation, was about $50 billion a year. And as soon as women came out and started to vote en masse and join the workforce, now that number is $700 billion a year. It rose exactly in lockstep with women's sexual liberation and out-of-wedlock births. And the number of children under 6 with full-time working mothers in 1940 was only 6%. Today, that number is 58%, meaning that in 2016, 20% of all U.S. households spent more than a quarter of their income on childcare. The average time for children enrolled in daycare per week is 35 hours. 26% of all American adult women are on at least one psychiatric drug. And 1/3 of all children living in the United States today are living in a home without their biological father, putting them at massive risk for things like homelessness, admission to psychiatric hospitals, behavioral disorders, abuse treatment centers, being in a juvenile correctional facility. And children living in a home without both biological married parents are more likely to be subjected to all types of abuse by a factor of at least 8 times. That number goes up depending on the situation. So, after 100 years of this, are you still going to tell me that with all the harm and damage done to children, done to women and men, done to liberty and freedom, done to the structure of the government you want so badly to be small and less invasive, do you still think that overall it's worth it?
Yes, for 2 reasons. One, it goes back to the first point you made that I didn't respond to yet, which is that we have to be pragmatic in our approach. So even if I concede your argument, it's because I bring up women's tyranny that would vote against these things if we start to talk about it. That still means that the desired outcome would be less likely, which means the approach we should be taking to solve all of the terrible things you just talked about need to be done so in a way that has the best chance to achieve the desired outcome. And if we're doing something that we know would achieve the exact opposite outcome, even if you think it's because they're shitty people that are easily misled and that will use their tyranny, it's still something that pragmatically we should seek to avoid. The second thing is, I think that there's a problem, although I think that you're going to be spot on the data that how women vote. Couldn't you do that with other groups? For example, I think it wasn't legally until 1870 that blacks had the right to vote in this country. Yet if we started at that point and looked at all that same data, the numbers might not be as stark, but they would still be stark that many of those things have been incredibly rapidly deteriorating. My question to you then is, if we could show that blacks tend to vote for bigger government and things like that, would you think that they should also not have the right to vote based on their race because it led to these worse outcomes?
No, and the reason for that is the same as what the answer would be that I would give to the use of force argument when you say, well, what if blacks can't defend their rights against, white men because their numbers are smaller or something like that? It's because if you look at every demographic, regardless of race, religion, class, socioeconomic status, the woman question is the big defeater. So you can look at different cross sections of different voting groups, and there will be differences among the men. So for instance, black men versus Asian women could all be very different. But women as a whole are, number one, the largest voting bloc, and they are firmly in the camp of Democrats and have been since 1980. So if you just take away the racial, all the other differences, it doesn't matter if you're a black woman, an Indian woman, a Christian woman, an atheist woman. The only thing where there's a little bit of wiggle room is married women do tend to be slightly more conservative, but unfortunately, married women are in the minority now. So no, it still doesn't stand to reason to divvy things up that way, because it doesn't matter what color you are. If you're a woman, you're going to vote for less rights and more government.
So I just real quick, I know that there's probably a bunch of other callers. There's two criticisms I have with this. One, it seems now that there's a threshold argument. I'm not positive of this, but I'm guessing if I pulled up a map of the 2020 election and could somehow get the data to show if only black men voted, probably still would be overwhelmingly blue, which would mean that many of these same positions. So you seem to be saying, yeah, but it's worth with women. Maybe true, but if it means that women lead to bad outcomes and these black men would lead to bad outcomes only slightly less worse than women, then intuitively it would imply that we should also take away their right to vote, because the immutable characteristic argument seems to be thrown out the window with you. You're like, you don't care about that. You're only concerned about the utilitarian outcome. And second, that gets to my second... just real quick, let me say, because I think that and this will be a direct response you'll have to this, is the question of the ought, right? You're looking at it right now through a utilitarian framework and saying, if they do this, these are the bad outcomes we see. But does this answer the question of, ought we be allowed to restrict people's right to vote based on immutable characteristics like sex or race?
I think we should be able to restrict people's right to vote based on not only immutable characteristics, but a lot of other things. So, I'm not in any way for universal suffrage. I'm for as much as you could limit suffrage as possible is what I would be for. I'd be looking for every possible way I could to exclude every group and individual that I could possibly eliminate. So no, it's not that I'm coming at it from a utilitarian point of view. I do think the reason I brought up the draft question is because I felt you had a contradiction by saying we shouldn't do things based on immutable characteristics unless it's sending men to die in a war, and then it's fine.
You're also forgetting that black men can get drafted, so I don't really know where you're going with that.
What I was going to say next is the fact that women are the only group. Black men can, use force and they can be drafted and they're held responsible in a way that women are not. Women are the only group. It's specific only to women, not to race or religion or socioeconomic status. Women are the only group that can vote to use force they don't possess to send other people to fight in wars, to lock people in jail, to
and I have to leave the call there. We won't be able to get to all the callers.
Sure, no problem. Thanks, fellas.
I'll let you rebut. Go
ahead. just real quick. I don't know if Rachel can stay to answer, but Jimbob can answer if he wants, since he debated. There is a question I have on the utilitarian calculus list, and I would have asked Rachel the same question, obviously, is let's invert this. Let's say that I could prove to you, 100 years from now, let's say women don't have the right to vote for 100 years, and we're somehow still alive because we're damn healthy people. And so what we see is, through some other machinations, all these crazy crazy woke shit, blue shit starts appearing again. And I could prove to you, if we just leave women vote in these next 2 elections, they're super conservative now and they would have better values. Would you be okay with the women voting then? If they if they tipped the scales for the policies you wanted?
I mean, I don't think so. I would just stand on principle that the goal would be to just eliminate the vote and reduce it to men, and then from men you reduce it to Rob and myself and other people would debate. Well, okay, what are the preconditions for?
I would be interested what Rachel would think about that, because it seemed to be she was implying when she said restricted as much as possible that she was basically saying she just wants the desired outcomes that she thinks is best for the country.
Well, let me just counter the hypotheticals, right? So say, sure, Rob, I would.
Okay.
Now, Rob, descriptively, if you found out, hypothetically, you found out that that would never happen, that women will never change their voting patterns no matter what, and you had a crystal ball to know that they were always going to vote this way no matter what, would you then be okay with limiting their vote?
No, I would still say.
Right. So you're at the mercy of the same argument, Rob.
But that's fine.
Utility.
But the question, argument.
So we're pattern recognition machines, right? Because we're pattern recognition machines, we look at this, we go, okay, we can clearly see the patterns and their reasoning behind why they vote the way that they vote. We can't actually predict the future since we can't make those future predictions on anything except current trends. Why would we not base whatever we do currently on the things which are going on right now that affect us in the negative way, especially for these rights things you keep appealing to, right?
Because what this is illustrated is on the foundational principle, we have a disagreement where I'm saying that it is not outcomes desired that are influencing my choice. I believe that things ought to be the way they are because of some principle that's
you
not
wouldn't
directed.
vote if it wasn't based around outcomes, dude.
You also don't believe that. You also don't believe that. Why? Because Rachel elucidated, and I did during the debate, that you're not consistent with immutable characteristics, because you admitted that you support the men being the primary goers to war and being drafted. And is that not an outcome-based deliberation?
No, there is a difference in what I said. I could repeat the answer if you want, that the idea of having people having a say in the government's different than in an emergency situation, having to get the best fighting force possible. I also said that there are selective times where maybe you actually would, after the men were expended, still need to draft the women. If all the women are gone, you may still need to draft women to do that.
Rob, what I stated is that ultimately you're appealing to future predictive outcomes, which means that you're willing to use immutable characteristics to determine that men are drafted and women aren't.
Yes.
And it's based on the knowledge or the inductive reasoning that men will produce a better outcome in war, right?
Correct.
Okay.
That's different than saying that people need to, in an emergency situation, we need to do something different than saying in a default situation in this country that women shouldn't have the right to vote. Because I want to get back real quick to what Andrew said there is what we see is that it's not that I'm using utilitarian framework. It's actually you that's using the utilitarian framework, because you're saying based on the outcomes is how you would decide whether or not women should vote. I'm saying even if it led to outcomes that I don't desire, that I still think they should have that right.
Well, I would say you could use both. You could use both at the same time.
I'll bring on the next caller. I want to make sure Rob got the last word. We are in the call-in section, right? Though, so I'm going to be able to give my opinion as well.
Yeah, I don't care. Yeah, of course.
You ready?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'm gonna go ahead and give my best ABC moderator impression. I'm gonna ask Jimbob why he said that Rob Noerr is really wrong and bad in everything he said. Now, that's kidding. I'm going to go ahead and ask Rob. This is a real question.
Okay.
We're talking about immutable characteristics when it comes to voting. So a person does not decide where he is born. So if your idea is immutable characteristics, wouldn't that mean that everybody that comes to the United States should have a right to vote based on, well, the reason that he's alive? He doesn't have a way of saying where he was born.
No,
because
I think a higher value than the immutable characteristic thing, which I still put a value on, is the fact that this government is for the citizens of this country. And so every foundational to any government is that it should exist it primarily for the will of the people that are forced to enter in that pact many times against their will. So therefore, people, if they're not born in this country, should not have the right to vote, with exceptions. If they become legal citizens, then I guess that's different. Having said that, once we have that barrier to entry, that you're a citizen of this country, I don't think that we should then say that you don't have these rights to vote because of immutable characteristics. So there seems to be some tension in what you're saying is, but there are things like if you weren't born in this country, you didn't have a chance. But what I'm saying is I don't put as the highest value the immutable characteristic. I think one of the values that's higher than that is you have to be a citizen of this country. But following that, then yes, immutable characteristic is something that we should value.
Okay.
And you can become a citizen, so it's not immutable.
Well, what I'm saying.
Well, where they were born is immutable.
Yes.
Yeah, when they were born is immutable. That was the idea. If you're talking about the immutable characteristic,
but there's you would acknowledge that there is a path for people not born here to become citizens. And second, do you agree that that should be the case?
No, that's not always the case.
It's not always, but it is a possibility.
For some people, yeah.
Okay,
Hey,
so then it's not immutable.
Rob, I mean, maybe this is a really simple question. Why is citizenship
Hang on, let's let the caller finish.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, caller.
Okay. I just have a small follow-up. Hope the reason why there's another part of your argument I would like to tackle real quick is the idea of the draft when it comes to you said that you wouldn't mind having restrictions on who votes depending on what are the specifications that they need to follow. If that is the case, why is it that you follow one of the genders? Why do you think one of the genders is more equal than others?
So
one has to register to the draft, the other doesn't. And if you say that the weapons are an equalizer in that regard, then why don't you say, well, we're equal?
Okay. Two things to say in this. One, I wanted to ask. I'm legitimately asking this question, so feel free, Andrew, Jimbob, or the caller to jump in. Do women now have to register for selective services? Nope. I literally don't know. They don't. Okay.
They're trying to pass it, though.
Right. So if that would pass, if it would get passed, do you think women should have the right to vote then?
Nope.
No.
Okay,
no,
so then...
By the way, Rob, if it did get passed, would you be okay with an armed forces that's weaker and can't protect what you call liberty?
No. But again, it was saying that's exactly the point that I'm getting here. So first,
no, the reason. Well, no, to respond to your argument, it doesn't make any sense because ultimately, even if we were to say yes, okay, now they can get drafted like men, they still aren't going to be going to the front line, fighting on the front lines, doing shit like that. That's not what's going to happen. Now, if we were to say, Andrew, women are going to get drafted the same rates as men and sent to the front line to get their asses blown off in the event of a war. Yes, absolutely. I'd let them vote then, right? Okay. And then I'd want them because the first time they voted for a fucking war they had to go fight in, I think that they would want to give them the right to vote up.
Immediately, right?
Yeah, look, that is at least a differentiation with merit. I think that is a differentiation, but I still think like there's certainly men that would fit that criteria that even if they were drafted, either one would be unable to go, period, or second.
Yeah, but there's social shame on men. There's no social shame on women.
But come on.
Yeah, but Rob, I just don't understand.
No, it is. There's social shame. So, like, if you don't sign up for the draft, you can't vote, can't get a gun, can't do all sorts of different things. You're a draft dodger. You have to get forgiven by the United States government before you can even participate in any of those activities again.
That's true, but now we're getting to a separate level, right? Now we're getting to there's a shame component of it that somehow makes this differentiation.
No, there's a law component.
There is a law, right, but we're talking in the hypothetical situation that there wasn't a law component, that the law component was basically equalized.
Yeah, if you were to equalize the law, if you were to say to me, Andrew, I want to have a draft where if the nation was under direct threat, the women got drafted at the same rates as men in order to make it even Stevens and got sent to the front lines to battle alongside the men. I would be all fucking for it. Absolutely.
Okay. Then when I talk about what there are men that wouldn't be there, you're like, that wouldn't be drafted in that situation. You say there'd be shame.
Well, no, there's always a potential. Here's the thing. All men have the potential to be drafted, including a quadriplegic.
Sure.
If the military needs something in that quadriplegic's mind that they think is going to assist them, they can still get drafted by the United States military. All men have the potential to get drafted, every one of them. No, they can't.
Why not? They have force. If they have guns and decide they're going to do it, who's to stop?
Because it's a violation of the law.
Who gives a shit? You've already conceded that the only thing that matters is who has the gun.
Well, yeah, I guess, Rob, if we throw out the rule of law, then everything is possible. If we just say, okay, now we can just do whatever the fuck we want, sure, but I think we're operating within the confines of
which is exactly Which is
and the rule of
exactly
law.
which is exactly what I'm doing. So like when you're talking about like road courts doing this or that to buttress back against the fact that it's unlikely that this law gets passed like egalitarianly, that's exactly the point that I'm making. To get to the callers,
that doesn't address what I just said. So what
Sure
I just
does.
said was this. So let's see if you can address what I just said.
okay,
What I just said to you was, all men currently, right this second, have the potential to get drafted. All of them.
Yes.
That's what you're banking the right to vote on, is that potential. The potential for that. You say some men will not be drafted. That's
Yes.
never been in contention because all men have the potential to be.
right. The argument I'm making is many times when I make an argument about sort of why women should have the right to vote, you constantly say that all of our rights only come through force. And so therefore, even if something's enshrined, such as the First Amendment, you say, but that only exists because the people with guns allow it to exist. If they determine tomorrow it doesn't exist and they have the guns, then it won't exist. There's no reason that same argument wouldn't apply to the hypothetical, because you give what I consider to be sort of a ridiculous hypothetical that, well, they could take the paraplegic. The chances of that happening are so astronomically low, but if we're going to talk about an astronomically low hypothetical like that, then it's also true that theoretically, because if they could do it because they have force, they could do it to women as well.
No. Okay, so first of all, you're talking about the distinction in potentials. Okay. Do you agree with me that a quadriplegic getting drafted is 100% more likely than a woman getting drafted because women can't get drafted?
Not 100%, no.
Okay, can women get drafted?
Theoretically, there's probably emergency war.
No,
No, not
actually-
theoretically. No,
actually.
there's no
We're talking
emergency.
about
There's
the
no
law.
emergency power for women to get drafted. None.
I
We're talking
would
about
I don't know
actuality.
that
We're
that's
not talking about potentiality.
That's true. It's true. Look
It's
it
true.
up.
You can't. Women can't get drafted, bro. They don't. How would they even draft them? They don't fucking sign up for the draft, Rob. How would they even do it?
They
They
could
just go to your door like, "Hello, Michelle. We've decided under the emergency powers of not knowing who the fuck you even are because you never signed up for the draft to draft you."
It wouldn't have to be like that. Let's say that there's an invading force that's coming into New York, into New York City, and they need someone to, operate a military vehicle in an emergency situation. Could they say, that woman right there, you have to get in this car and do this? I don't know what the
No,
legality
they can't.
is.
They can't.
I don't know, but it
They
wouldn't
can
have
do it
be
to a fucking man, though. They could do an emergency draft right on the street and take his
Mutable-
ass.
Yeah, where's
I
the
don't know.
mutable characteristic defense now?
That I already explained the difference. So
No, you
wanna-
conceded.
No,
You
I didn't
didn't
concede.
explain-
I'll
no,
explain the difference
there's
again.
not-
I'll
no, no,
explain the
if-
difference. I'll
if
explain the
it's the
difference
case-
again.
Hold on, Rob. If it's the case,
Bring
that
on
it's
like
okay-
7 more people,
Hold
ABC.
on.
We'll
If
keep
it's
filibustering
okay
here.
for
Let's do
you
it.
to discriminate against men based on immutable characteristics, the entire argument against women is gone because you accept it for men. So why not just equalize it and say, great, if we accept the discrimination for men to be drafted, which I'm totally okay with, right? And I also take Andrew's approach. Go for it. Draft all the women. See what happens. That's the best way for them to be like, I don't want to fucking vote anymore. But the thing is, if you accept that, I don't understand how you could accept drafting people, even against their will, to go fight and potentially die based on immutable characteristics. But you can't do the equivalent inverse, which is to say, women, you can't vote based on immutable characteristics.
Because
It's the
there is a
principles
difference.
there.
There is a difference in an affirmative right that you have, the right to have input in your government. That is a foundational right. If you are forced to pay taxes in this government, if you are forced to live under the laws of them, then the bare minimum is you should have a right to have some sort of voice in it. That is, you should not be allowed to discriminate against people for that basic right. That should be a foundational right
Not
of
many
any
people pay
government.
taxes.
Please allow me to finish.
No,
I
not
think
many
that
people pay
now listen.
taxes.
I think it's
Mr.
incredibly
Bubba.
generous that I'm doing like a 12-on-1 here, and then I continue to get
no problem.
interrupted. Is what I'm trying to
All
give
right,
an
my-
answer. So-
I have my apologies.
It's all right. So I think that is a fundamental right that you should have. That if you have no choice but to be part of this government because you live here and you have to pay taxes, and if you're here, you do. You have to pay sales taxes. You have to pay income taxes. There are laws that you have to abide by. Then you should have some sort of voice. That is a different question than if there is an emergency situation where there is a war where we need people to defend and we want the most competent chance to be able to defend. And the best chance to do that would be drafting the people that would be the best fighters at that point. Then I think that should be men. That is a completely different situation. There are other things where I think a mutable characteristic should be allowed to be used. For example, there are other things that would be beneficial to women that I think that we should allow, such as I don't have a problem in general defaulting to mothers being the people that are considered the primary caregivers. Obviously, there should be exceptions to that, but I think biological reality is that women women tend to have those roles more, and I am in favor of those preferred gender roles. So there are situations where I would say on these sort of fringe things that you could use immutable characteristics in this way, but not when it comes to a foundational right like having a voice into a government you're forced to participate in.
Big Hoss, you've been waiting patiently. Go ahead when you're ready.
Hello, Rob.
Hello, how's it going, Big Oz?
All's well. I just wanted to ask the question about so whenever a man creates something, what is the point at which that thing that they create or he creates, what is the point whenever that thing becomes like an independent object ready to be used by either men or women, like the equivalency of the stick on the ground, like what Andrew said earlier?
Once it's completed and able to be used for the purpose of the person that's using it.
And it's up to that capacity of the person able to use it?
Yes. For example, let's take something that maybe would be a weird example. Let's say I personally craft a fishing pole, but maybe the reel's not working on it. And then Jimbob sees that pole laying on the ground and there's an aggressor coming at him and he picks it up and uses it as a club. It is a club at the point that Jimbob's using it as a club.
What is the what's the separation of like an individual and the collective, like men, for example? Because like, sure, yeah, I agree, like men have created like a bunch of stuff, but you know, not every man it has the capacity to make amazing stuff. So I mean, like I don't know how to articulate it, but like how do you separate the collective from the individual?
That's a question for Jimbob, probably, because that's exactly my point. I think that we shouldn't say that an individual isn't self-actualizing if they use a product created by someone else. I think that's nonsensical. But if we are going to say that, it doesn't make sense to say that we do so based on a collective. So if you were part of this group of collective, because think of the infinite ways you could do this. You could say, oh, it was created by white people. So if a white person uses a gun to defend themselves, even though they had no part in the creation of it, that's self-actualization of force because they're white and a white person created it. But if a black man does it, black men didn't create it. So therefore, that's not self-actualization. So you would have to ask Jimbob where that comes from.
Just to clarify something. I retract something that self-actual, the you know, Andrew brought up the alien thing. Whether it's self-actualization is different than the adequate. I think my argument rests on what constitutes adequate, and that brings up a bigger conversation about the maintenance of governance and force over time, including war, including non-war. The question of whether something's adequate over time, I think, is a better thing. I'll revise the argument to include this, by the way. It's just that determining whether something is self-actualizing, for instance, the alien, yes, they pick up the gun, they find it. They're actualizing what they have. Fine. The chick with the gun, who, you know, someone made a gun, she has it. She uses it for self-defense. In that instance, it was adequate enough to defend off the one person. The question of governance, though, is really a collective question, isn't it, Rob?
Yes, government. Okay. Sure, okay. It's a collective.
So I'll do my due diligence. I'll revise the argument to be dedicated toward the collective, because what's in question here, when regards to voting or upholding a liberal society that you love, right? It's going to come down to the collective enforcement, which ends up being the real question as far as what's the threshold of adequacy.
Listen, I would be willing to have that conversation in the future as well, but I have to say I remain skeptical for this reason. It seems that you were quite adamant, and it seems that you were prepared a statement and you created this document and whatever, that there was something unique about the trading of force you have for the collective, and because men have the ability to defend themselves and women don't, men are trading something that women don't have. But if you lose the argument that a woman using a gun is self-actualization of her defense and her force, then it is entirely reasonable to say that she is trading that to the government. No. And so it almost, let me finish real quick. It almost seems like you're moving the goalposts because you have a desired outcome that you don't want women to vote, and so you will change the argument to meet that.
No. It's more so this, Rob, is that I formulated the argument in a day, and I realize now that I have to make a clear distinction between a particular instance, which you brought up, and the necessary instances, which is the collective force. So the collective force is something that's necessary to govern, to have rights, to uphold the justice system, and so forth. So you want this society that maintains liberty, you're going to need the necessary force. I'm saying women wholly themselves could never be the necessary force. Now, you think that's so. I disagree with you, and I don't think you've provided an adequate example of where women are the primary and sole providers of enforcement. It's never happened. It'll never happen. It's a violation of the law of identity between the ontology of men and women.
Okay.
Reframe it. Well, reformat it. No, I'd be happy to talk to you about it again.
Sure.
All right. Thank you, Big Hoss. Adam Dole, go ahead when you're ready.
Hello. First thing I want to say, good debate. However, Rob, you said prior to the debate starting on your own stream that you're going to try to be funnier than Jimbob.
Fuck that up, didn't I?
My main criticism is that you were not. You completely failed. Okay,
I did.
Anyway.
That is true. Jimbob, one of the funny. I get a kick out of all Jimbob's comics. So Jimbob, I told my audience I got to be funnier than this prick tonight, and I failed. I admit that. I do.
I should have been more funny.
You didn't even have to. I wasn't funny at all.
So I suppose my main question is actually for Rob. I'm honestly confused. Why is it seems as if you have an assumption that democracy is necessary for a small government. Why is that the case? I don't see how that follows.
So if you define democracy as people having a voice in the way that they're governed, which I think is a good way to define democracy, so not necessarily direct democracy where each person gets one vote and we don't have representatives, they vote on every issue. I don't believe that's necessary. But I do believe foundationally that each individual that is a citizen of this country has the right to have a voice in how the direction that this country goes. The mechanism that our government has chosen to at least give that effort is voting. If the country was set up in a different way where people didn't vote and it was somehow their voice was heard in a different way and no one got to vote, that could potentially be something it would be interested to hear about. But I don't think that we should give people more of a voice or less of a voice strictly based on an immutable characteristic like the genitalia that they were born with or their sexual organs.
That's a contradiction.
I don't think so.
No, here's how it is, and I'll let Adam talk. But just the fact that you stated give them means that there's a giver. That means that the authority is the giver, right? So there's a taker and a giver?
Well, no, because you've already agreed. The individuals are giving up something, right? They're giving their consent to be governed. They're giving tax dollars, right? So they're giving and they're getting something in return.
I'm talking about the liberty. I'm talking about wherever you think the transaction is and whether you think it's fair or not is irrelevant to the point that if there is an authority, that's ultimately the force. Force application in this case is men, the government. So when you say give, aren't you saying that someone is the authority? When you say give, I'm giving you rights.
Yeah, I think it's a crude way of putting it, but in the spirit, I think in spirit, you're right.
Can women, Rob, give me rights, or can only men give me rights?
Both.
No, wait. Give me an example of when women, it's possible, logically, practically, where women give me rights.
If Hillary Clinton won the presidency and was the chief executive of our military.
The military is made up of?
Men predominantly.
Yeah,
and who's in charge of them? If Hillary snapped her fingers, they would have do you think they would have revolted?
Well, that's at the mercy of men again. I'm asking,
but
give
again,
me an example of when women are the ones who say, declare it so. I will give you, I brought this up in the debate. If there was the case where we swapped out all the founding fathers and all the people who drafted up the Constitution and their vision, if it was a bunch of people in wheelchairs and women, do you think they could have adequately made that happen the same way men would make it happen?
Probably not, but I think there's a disconnect. I don't think that only the sex of the people that have the predominant use of force should be the only ones in the say of how a government operates. And I also think that as technological...
Just the ones who protect it.
Right. No, I think that, for example, Andrew, if we all decide to live together and we're living in some crazy like inner city where there's a bunch of gangs and Adam and Jimbob are badasses and they're the ones sitting on the porch every day with ball bats, but me and you are using our brains to like create some awesome show and bring in money. I don't think that only Adam and Jimbob should have a say in how the household goes.
Yeah, but what if Adam and Jimbob have the exact same potentiality for getting drafted as you?
Well, again, that's a separate argument than what we're
I
talking
don't think
about.
it is. I think
It
that,
is.
again, it's necessitating that you're saying that the force, the people who are providing the force for these freedoms, in this case, men, you're always just appealing to men, no matter what. You say, oh, well, what if Hillary Clinton's in charge of men? Well, that says still at the mercy of the men. If she was in charge of all the women and not any of the men, then they would again be at the mercy of men. So everything is just kind of reduced again and again and again, even in your worldview, to, well, men are the givers of rights. Men are the ones who are protectors of the rights.
They are
Men.
They are not. You're taking, right, there is a sort of circle in the use of force. And although at the ground level it may be men that are predominantly the givers of force that would protect your rights, there are women potentially elsewhere in that circle that allow for that force to be given, such as mothers that are taking care of children that allow those men to go off to war, such as women that would be in
Oh,
position.
no, they don't allow that. They don't allow that.
Men are allowing them to do that.
Wait.
Yeah, the
what?
women don't allow the men.
Yeah, so
to leave.
like if all the men decided tomorrow to put all the women in breeding cages, they could, right?
Right. This gets back to the argument that you just said was ridiculous, that if all the men decided that they're going to draft women, you're like, yeah, but the rule of law and blah, blah, blah. So I'll use the same argument you used to counter me. That
No.
But
these
that's
are
against
two-
the rule of law. These are absurd
Nope,
hypotheticals.
You're conflating two
Not.
different
It's
things.
apples to apples comparison.
So the one was inside of your hypothetical, and your hypothetical was asking the question of if X, in this case, if you knew all the women in the world were going to vote Republican policies, would you still give them the right to vote? So in response to this, I was giving you an idea of the rule of law and how feasible that would be.
That's not when you said
Hang
that.
on, my turn. Hang on. Yeah, I was saying how feasible that would be. So you're taking a thing which I'm saying this is feasible and mapped onto reality with a principle. I'm giving you a force doctrine principle, not saying that this maps on to the reality of likelihoods the same way that I'm saying how the rule of law is prescribed would map onto likelihoods.
So again, that's not when you brought up that. You brought it up when I said you made the argument, well, only men are drafted, therefore they should be the only people with the right to vote. And I said, well, hypothetically, if the men have force and can do what they want, they could theoretically, the people with guns could force women to be drafted as well. That's when you said
men. Right, that would still be men.
That's correct. But the argument that you're making there, although it would still be men, is the people with force can force the others to do what they want.
Yeah,
that's
men.
right. That
okay,
means, Rob,
you're saying
Rob,
men,
that means no, but Rob, listen.
I just wanted to
you
ask
said
about
you
democracy.
hold on, Adam. I promise. I'll just be real quick. Rob, you said I think people who aren't really the monopoly of force should have a say.
Yes.
What we're saying is that say reduces to nothing without force.
right? You could say that, but
So there is no say. So
there
to
is a say.
I think women should hold a sign. In the end, whatever their say is meaningless without the force application.
That's not true, because now
Yes,
you
it
default.
is.
Let me finish. Right? What you do is you default. The exact argument. The reason I made the argument that theoretically the people with force could draft women if they wanted was because I knew what your responses would both be, which was to eschew it and say that's guffaw, that's ridiculous. We still have to follow the rule of law. That was the words that Andrew used specifically. So we're operating under the, well, it's not just heathens that do whatever we want. We have a rule of law. The same would be true here. Yes, while you're correct that predominantly at the bottom level, the people that are, or at the most direct level, the people that are using the guns are predominantly men. I think that other people contribute to this system, including women, and so therefore they should have a voice in the form
At the
of
mercy
tax.
of men.
Okay,
Right.
you could say at the mercy of men, but
It is
again,
at the mercy of men.
okay, you
Men
could
should
say
give
that,
them the
but
voice, right?
you could
Men
say
should
that,
give
but
them
the
the
point,
voice, right?
that what I'm saying, you could say men should give them a voice. I say
Allowance.
they're giving up. I say they're giving up something
right
in
then.
return. I say they're
Not a
giving
right
up
then.
something.
If
I say
men
they're
give them. Yeah,
Holy
Rob,
shit.
if men give them, if men give them the voice, it's not a right. It's not based on their existence of being a human being. It's an allowance that you think is preferable, that still appeals to the authority, wholly patriarchal, hierarchical, that come from men. Are you willing to admit that all rights, women's rights, come from men or at the mercy of men?
I'm willing to admit that you could make the argument that all rights only exist at the end of the day because some sort of force, and that force is predominantly men. The vast majority of men are not included in that group. They just happen to share the same genitalia with those men. So every argument you're using that implies that that women shouldn't be able to vote because ultimately it comes down to a guy with a gun, then only that guy or those guys with that gun that are forcing enforcing.
Very good.
They're giving allowances to you. You're not that guy, Jim Bob.
I
You
know,
have
I
no
know,
rights.
I
You're
know.
given
Listen,
allowances
Rob,
just like a woman.
listen
You're just a
listen
woman
how-
in this
listen how
situation, and you
consistent
shouldn't
I
be
am.
allowed to vote.
Rob, if starting with women not voting meant that I, myself, Jimbob, didn't meet the criteria for voting, I would accept it.
Okay, but your criteria is the men's with guns enforce it. You're not one of them. So if we
That's
get
right.
rid of women's right to vote, you also
Yep.
would voluntarily say you won't vote.
Therefore, if I appeal to the authority, the descriptive truth of reality that men with guns ultimately dictate all of it, the only necessary and important question is, what is the theology, what is the worldview of those men with guns? That's all. That's all the debate really is, Rob.
Well, that's not true.
It's libertarian. Yeah, it is. If it comes down to force is the only arbiter for law, rights, voting, whatever you want to include in a society. If it's the case that it all reduces to might, then the only question is, what is the mentality and philosophy of the men with
That's
might?
self-evidently not true. Let me
How?
ask you this. Do you think the average military service person in this country is more or less conservative than the average voter?
That's a worldview.
More
But-
conservative.
okay.
So if Jim Bob's correct that it's only their opinions that matter because they have the guns, then why is our country becoming radically left-wing?
What do you mean? I don't understand how that follows.
Jim Bob's argument is the only opinions that matter are the people that are literally holding the guns. But if those people are markedly
didn't
more
say that.
conservative
I
than
didn't say
the
that was the only
I
opinions
didn't
that
say
matter.
that. I didn't say that.
Okay, then what did you say?
By the way, can I influence men with guns?
Yes, so can women.
So the distinction here is I don't need to have the gun to appeal to authority of people
Exactly.
with guns.
Same with
Like,
women. Yep.
Right, no. Well, no, because women don't have a choice at all. I could actually become a man with a gun.
They could become a woman
women
with a
can't.
gun, theoretically.
No, they
Women
can't. We
serve in the
already
military, they do.
We already demonstrated that even
Women can
you-
become a man with a gun? What?
Did I say that? Women could become
You
a
did
person
say
with a
you
gun.
said that
Yeah,
you
I
could become a
think-
man with a gun.
I misspeak there. Holy shit,
Yeah.
I am becoming
Sorry,
a
no,
fucking...
yeah,
You
But
turfs,
hang on, to
you
be
turf
fair, yeah,
assholes.
you fucking
We
turf.
totally
All
took
right.
over-
Hang
we took
on.
over
Adam, finish your question. We got to wrap
Okay.
up.
So I just came here to talk about democracy. Okay.
Democracy.
Very quickly.
So you're saying a democracy is any system where the general populace has a say in the government, right, Rob?
Correct.
Okay. So hypothetical, two different nations. In one nation, only super rich people can bribe the government to do what they want, and in the other nation, even the lowly peasant can bribe your local police officer to get away with fines. Is the second one, with significantly more corruption, obviously, is the second one more democratic than the first, assuming broadly similar structure?
I think that there's a problem because you use the term corrupt, right? And so the argument that you seem to be implying is if
Accepting
everyone's
bribes
corrupt
is
in
corruption, right?
okay, if everyone's corrupt in one country and only the influential wealthy people are corrupt in the other, is the country where everyone's corrupt more corrupt? I guess self-evidentiary, just based on numbers.
No, I'm talking about democracy. I'm talking about whether or not the one with more corruption is more democratic because more people can influence the government via corruption.
It would depend on whether or not the country was going in the direction of what the majority of the will of the people wanted.
Well,
The reason we don't, like, for example, the reason that we're not...
hold on.
Okay.
Aren't you an individualist?
Yes.
Okay, so the majority will of the people, that's some mystical nonsense, right? We're talking about individuals. The individual, more individuals in the case where the government is more corrupt can influence the government to do what they want, obviously, because they are able to bribe government officials in that case, right?
Right. So I guess if I'm trying to get you correctly, no, because you're leaving out factors. So I can't answer the question because there are certain factors that you're not given that means I can't answer it. For example, if it was a one-to-one comparison that the most amount of dollars led to the country going in the direction it wanted. So in one country with the wealthy people, a small handful of people, their money they're giving small amounts of money that's enabled to influence the government. But in the other country, you have all of these people. And and so it would be more democratic. But in that country, the wealthy people, even though everyone could solicit bribes, the wealthy people are doing way more, and so there's still, you as a peon could still say, hey, I went out of this ticket, here's $5. But the overall direction of the country, the wealthy people there are spending far more money to drive it.
Guys, I gotta leave it there. Okay, that's it for the call. I gotta get to these super chats, guys, or I'll never get these people out of here. I'll never get them out of here.
5 hours.
Yeah, I'll never get them out of here if we don't. So, Serious Shelby, the more we donate to the stream, it will definitely fix Jimbob's camera. Like the video while we chill. Shit. Noah says Jimbob, more like Jim Late. Lucas Zupan says even the possibility of flaming him fixed the cam issue. $50 from Silent says nothing, just wanted to support the stream. Fortome says Jimbob having tech issues, haram. He must shave his arms in order to be halal again. $50 from Noah says Silent, you are not outdoing me tonight in super chats. And then the super chat war commenced. Spyro says we know who will win based on shoulder width and length. For Pete's sake, Jimbob's shoulders look like two stalks crashing hard on both sides. In the middle is just inflation.
Is that a compliment? I don't even understand.
Wicked Wally says it's almost September 13th. You know what that means? It means September is too old for Muhammad.
Oh, shit.
Am I gonna get part of a jihad here? What the
Mike says for $5, women will always vote to give up freedom for the illusion of security. Silent gives 5 Crucible memberships. Then Noah gives 5 Crucible memberships. Then Anthony says, fuck it, I'm giving 5 Crucible memberships. Then Silent gives a $5. And then Josh cuts in for $50 and says, hey, I want one too. A membership, I think. Bortone for $10 says, Andrew, yes. Okay, so he wants the dark side. Let's see. Yes, my young apprentice. Let the women's liberation grift flow through me. Make me rich. Give me focus. I thought that was pretty good. Pretty good. Josh Brooks says, for the metaphysical cope, whatever that means, great to see you live again, Andrew. Great to have you over here on the channel. 20 from the Unconventional Man. Did not know Rob's a feminist arguing for my rights. Alex for 5 Australian says, should I change my name to Rob Noerr's Big Labia just for fun? Good day, Andrew Rach and Mystery Crucible Crew. Hope all is well. Tyler B for 5 says, how does limiting voting to nuclear families to incentivize more families sound? God bless and safe travels. Thank you. Vortome says, if all the men in the United States unanimously decided that women no longer have the right to vote, there'd be absolutely nothing they could do to earn it back. The force to overcome would be too great. I don't think Rob disagrees with that, though.
No.
Wilhelm Bones for $10 says nothing. Just want to show support for the stream. Maul says, I would undoubtedly pay to see HBO pay-per-view of a cat fight for women to prove they have the right to vote in modernity. Most evil one for $10 says they both have a false narrative about women. No man would exist to impose force, period, without men and women go not to defend themselves. Hence why both have equal rights. Otherwise, it cancels each other's out. So I actually reject this. I think that I think that if men decided that women were just like to be bred forever, I don't think there'd be much women could do about it. So I just kind of reject the premise. Now, people often conflate this is claim with an odd claim. I'm just saying I think that is true. Not that they should do that. I'm just saying that it is true that they could do that. Josh Brooks gives 5 Crucible memberships. Appreciate that. FB says Jim Bond outliers and exceptions to prove the rule. This is a very small percentage, which is capable. Haas Knuckles for 5 says, if all men want to take guns away from women, would women be able to stop them? Men would be able to stop women from taking their guns. $5 from Clan Siege says, women who are trained firearms are a minority of the gun community and still choke under pressure when they're involved in actual firefights. $5 from Quoth, who says, so women can't read a tape measure? What the fuck? Well, I mean, actually they can't, for the most part, read a tape. I just want to point that out. But FB says... Yeah, FB says for $5, Jimbob, exception sand, outliers prove the rule. It's a very small percentage are capable. Most evil one, only force is force of nature, and only narrative should be for men and women to work together to survive in this world. These two, nature would take out first. Josh Brooks for 20 says the SEALs, the Seers, the Green Berets, tracking targets solo through dense rainforest at night with NVGs and the elements. Women would be able to, when half the men are stronger than them, quit SEALs anyway. Men dominate force. I don't think there's any disagreement on that either. $5 from Lord. It says, Jim doesn't know what the genetic fallacy is, nor apparently what immutable means. Thanks for the proper moderation. Only moderator doesn't join in. Not till the debate is over, right? Once the debate is over, and this is always explained to the participants before they come on, once the closing statements are done, I consider the debate to be closed. Then it becomes something of a free-for-all. Brandon, for $5, says, men like Rob are the reason we're in the problem we're in today. Stop white knighting, Rob, he says.
I can't help myself.
Yeah, by the way, Silent sends in another huge $50. Demetrius for 20 says, if they can self-actualize with a firearm, why should they not be drafted? That's a contradiction. That is an actual good point, Rob. If they are so good with the firearms and can self-actualize their defense against the evil menses, why can't we send those bitches to the front line, Rob?
It's not a contradiction because the paradigm that Jimbob put through was adequate self-actualization, which I think a woman with a firearm, it's particularly one trained, could do. That's different than wanting the best force to fight at the front line.
But it's adequate force.
Yeah, you said
it wouldn't be adequately protecting yourself from a home invader is different than adequately fighting special forces from another country.
I don't know. What if the home invader's armed?
Still, an armed woman would be better than an unarmed man.
Yeah, but what if the man is also armed, like many home invaders are?
It's still, I think there are chances that the gun equalizes more to the woman could adequately defend herself.
Well, why wouldn't that be the case in combat then?
Yeah,
because we're talking a home invader and protecting your property is different than wanting to send our best troops to defend our country to fight other trained troops. It's
I don't see why not.
You know it's different.
I mean, if you can actualize.
I'm wondering what the distinction is. I actually really am interested in what would be the distinction than more space.
We can't belabor it. We'll be on it all night. Dane says for $20, Rob, if we Thanos snapped away all the men and were invaded, would the women left with all of the technology be able to manufacture, ship, assemble, load, maintain, and use the weapons left by the men to defend themselves?
No, probably not. But if we snapped our finger to all the truck drivers right now, you think that like some of these soy fucking dudes we see in cities and stuff would be able to do it? My point is, no, I don't. I think that there is truth that there are exceptional men that do these laborious jobs, and that it's predominantly men that use force and do these sort of things that make it possible, but it's not exclusive to them, even if it's overwhelming them. And there's certainly many men that we should treat just with women. Therefore, we should do a meritocracy as opposed to some sort of immutable characteristic denial of rights.
Okay. Vertome for $20 says, in an RPG, you typically have a tank and a medic. And when you go out on the PvP raids, if you kill my mage and I kill your tank, who ends up winning that outcome? Assume rivals are not allowed. This translates to Force Dynamics IRL.
Not nerdy enough to get it.
Okay, fair enough. Silent sends in another 20. And then Noah's like, for 200, no, you didn't, Silent. And then Silent's like, for 300, yes, I did, fucker. And then Noah's like, you two wouldn't let me go over 5. And then Bonfire broke it all up with 50 and says, how is it that everyone with base views on the show has such damn good hair? There's something going on here. Great show, Andrew. Good showing from the guest. Jimbob crushed it. I thought that it was a great debate.
Not based.
Noer's a fantastic debater. Always said so. Even when I'm bludgeoning him, at least from my perspective, I still think he is one of the finest.
I gotta say, he's the best person I experienced debating. Shout out to
it was a lot of fun. You're very good too, Jimbob. I really liked it.
Now, let me pop over to the dono real quick, because Noah sent in $100 over there and said, Rob looks like an assistant manager at Radio Shack who just took a rip off a bong. Jimbob looks like a former youth pastor who was fired for drinking from his flask in a broom closet.
Hallelujah!
Thanks for the debate. 25 comes in from the Great Equalizer, says, guns and technology can be used by both sides. Let's take those out of the equation. And if women can defend their own rights and property from invasion, there's no reason they should not be subject to the draft.
I don't understand. Yeah, why the draft thing? Why, Rob? Why don't you just concede and bite the bullet and say, yeah, fucking draft him?
Because I believe in defined gender roles. But let me turn the question to both of you. It seemed Jimbob, at least, and maybe Andrew would bite this bullet as well, that there are some women that would be able to self-actualize adequate defense. It seems you conceded to that. Should those women be drafted?
No, because that's based on luck mostly.
Well, it doesn't matter what it's based on. It's not why it happened. It is that it is happening. So should they be drafted?
No.
Why?
Because I don't
Because-
trust a chick on the fucking front lines, dude.
Okay, same answer for me then. Fine, whatever. We both seem to
Yeah,
be
but
What's your
hypocritical
answer?
on that
What's your
point,
answer,
right?
Andrew,
I think
what's your answer?
I don't understand why I would have a problem biting a bullet, which is consistent with my position.
But it's not. It's what it does is it disproves the contention that you're putting with me, that you could think a woman could self-actualize defense, but still not want them drafted for various reasons. I'm saying the same thing.
There's exceptions to the rule.
That's
sure.
what I'm saying. Yeah.
They're just
But
generally
so,
not built-
but that moves to my point, which is like, okay, if you just point to all of the exceptions and say, therefore they should be able to do something, right? Why shouldn't I be able to point to the exceptions and say, then therefore they shouldn't be able to do something?
Because the default should be that people that are forced to participate in our government should have some voice in it. And
Yeah,
me
that's
saying,
the default. That the whole default thing. So my
Voices-
default, my default is like, no, they shouldn't, and that actually doesn't really even make sense. But that's a debate
it is a debate.
for another
We were
time.
spending time on Jimbob's syllogism. That's what I was operating off of. So.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Fair enough.
$500 from Noah R says, Silent can suck my dick. Brian from whatever will confirm that it's huge. I sent a woman to the hospital once. It's because she laughed so hard she fell down a set of stairs. Okay, he's actually a cool guy, and I feel bad now. That's what he says. He says he's actually a cool guy, and I feel bad now, says Noah, about Silence. That's pretty funny. Appreciate it very much. He says he believes, by the way, in defined gender roles, voting, leadership, impactful decisions about society have always been with the men's gender role.
Not voting.
Well, I mean, that's true. No, yeah, voting.
When you
voting
define
too.
always,
I mean, always throughout history.
pre
men,
1920.
no. Everywhere that voting was done previously, men either got the vote first or were the only ones who could.
Yeah, that's true. Historically, that's been the case, but we could say that with many other groups as well, right? Like landowners.
No, I don't think you can say that with every other group.
Like, what society that was democratic and had voting allowed people that weren't landowners to vote prior to?
I think Greece, for instance, I don't think you had to be
Well,
a
that's
landowner
true.
to vote.
That's true. I think it was direct democracy in Greece.
Yeah, I don't
But
think you had to
but
be a
the norm,
landowner.
I think, was that it was a select class of people that got to weigh in on this.
Yeah, well, usually it is, and that's why philosophers hated democracy, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of pointing that out. Noah, you're the last call. You've been waiting patiently, man. I'm gonna get your call in before we wrap the show. Go ahead, bro.
Hey, thank you guys very much. Can you all hear me good?
We can hear you.
Yep.
Perfect. So I kind of wanted to go back to an earlier point in the debate. The question is more directed at Rob, but panel, feel free.
Well, hey, hang on, bro. Did you tell Silent to suck your dick, bro?
Yeah, I did.
With it.
Okay.
I have fun
Go ahead,
at
bro.
basically. That's
Take
why
that, Silent.
I feel bad afterwards. I just like to have fun.
He's like a super nice guy. Even you felt so bad by the end of the super chat. You even added the addendum.
I think it'd be funny if he
I
shut the
yeah.
stream off midway through that super chat and didn't hear the end of it. He's so devastated. He's like, I'm out. Like,
Yeah. Well, thanks for the great support of the Crucible tonight. In any case, anyway, go ahead with your question, bro.
So it's just a question directed at the entire panel. Going back to a specific point in the debate about the women with drones, basically. Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're basically saying is that because women already have the technology that men have, it doesn't really matter because now they're theoretically equal on force. Is that correct?
I
Is
wouldn't
that,
say
like, a
equal,
basic-
but it's becoming closer to being equal because it used to be before this technology, you had to rely more on your physical strength. Now, as we progress technologically wise, even people with inferior physical strength could use lethal force.
Okay, but it would make sense to me that even though the men have built those weapons, they are also the ones who maintain that weaponry at the same time. So theoretically, if we're thinking about a sex war with basically men on one side, women on the other, eventually their drones, their weaponry on the women's side is going to end up breaking down. And that's typically men who fix that stuff anyways. So it would make sense to me that men still kind of have that edge in the long run, because it's not only that they build the weaponry, they maintain the weaponry at the same time.
But I'm not discounting. Like, I don't know how to make this clear. If all men decided to fight all women, it'd be a fucking wipeout. Right? I'm not disputing that. I'm saying that if you want to have a discussion on a meritocracy and say this is the threshold of use of force that you need to be capable of achieving before you vote, I would disagree with that, but I'm amenable to that argument more than saying we are going to define based on immutable characteristics you can't vote. And then when we talk about specific outliers, then going back and saying, but generally, men maintain the weapon, so even if they have the ability, that's the argument.
But Rob, you didn't say it would be a wipeout. I asked you really point blank whether or not a group of women with equal technology to men could theoretically, logically, logistically take over the men, and you said that's possible. But now you're saying
I thought I said
wipeout.
Maybe it was Andrew that's 999 times out of 1,000.
Okay,
right? You said that was something you said to Jimbob, but it wasn't in relationship to that question.
I don't know. I thought I tried to make it clear that.
But to Noah's question, wouldn't real true equality be of capability be women are able to develop the technology that men did that gave that tech to them, like Noah said?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't a real equalizer be if they could maintain and develop it? Wouldn't that be like a true equalizer?
No, I don't think it would equalize things.
All right. Well, let Noah finish real quick. Go ahead, Noah.
Nope, that was basically it. Just kind of an observation I made. But thank you guys very much for having me up. I appreciate
it. Of course.
It.
Have yourself a great night, bro. You take good care. Now, we got to wrap the show, guys, right? We did manage to get it at Jimbob showing right at 3 hours, right? So pretty close to it anyway. So before you guys go, though, you got to shout your channels out. Jimbob, where can everybody find you?
You can find me at Made by Jimbob at YouTube and at Instagram and everything else. I'm by Jimbob at Twitter, and so I do a lot of commentary, theology, philosophy, technological stuff, and commentary and comedy and whatnot. So you can find me there.
And of course, the great Rob Noerr.
Yeah, my YouTube channel is Normal America with Rob Noerr, spelled Noerr. I'm also on other platforms, Rumble, Twitch, X. You can find me at just Rob Noerr. I'm on there. Tomorrow night, you'll be able to find me on a panel on Dylan Burns' panel about who's better, Trump or Kamala. With Andrew, we'll be on the same side. I'll be pretending to be a right-winger again.
And of course, I'll be streaming that right here from the Crucible with the most amount of live viewers, just to piss off all the liberals who are going to be on that panel, right? I just know that they're going to be seething to note that tomorrow there'll be like 5,000 or 6,000 people watching from my end live, while we get to see the pathetic numbers that they have and laugh at them hysterically because they're fucking losers. As me and Rob body the entire panel, including potentially the conservatives who are on it. But anyway, Rob, I hope that this warm-up was worth it. You guys get out of here, go have a great night, and take good care of yourselves.
All right, thanks so much.
Now, to all the rest of you out there, before we wrap.
We don't need to hear Andrew's. Yeah, fun debate. You know, I think that there's a little irrational exuberance with that side. It becomes difficult, particularly in the call-in section, where it's like, one, Andrew and Rachel and most of the callers are good anyways, but then when it becomes like gloves off 3-on-1, it's difficult to get your shit in. There is the strongest argument they have, I'll be honest, is this draft argument. But I think that I articulate the case why I think saying that I'm okay with just men being drafted is different than saying I don't think we should restrict the right to vote to only the people that could be drafted, because other people contribute as well. If you're born here, you're forced to pay taxes, etc., you should have some sort of voice, and I don't think you should take away people's right to vote. I think that, strategically, maybe not the smartest of me to rely on Jimbob's syllogism the whole time, but I thought there was a lot of offense for me to attack there. And I'm actually pretty proud of how I handled that, given that he clearly prepared this syllogism and prepared statement, and I was able to go through it, just seeing it in real time, and find what I thought were holes in it and problems. So much so that he even admits that he's going to have to go back and rework it. And I think that that's very rare. Do you get a concession like that, that someone's, that someone's got to rework. And I think that's one of the best parts about debates like this, that, iron sharpens iron. And it's good to debate people that are good because it helps not only you learn more, but it helps you more robustly defend your position. So, hey, even if that's all that the people that don't like my position there from the Crucible got, then I'm happy to do that. But, it's not, for me, I think that, I don't know what my audience thinks. I think that my audience is probably dispositioned to disagree with me, many of them at least, on that sort of thing. Yeah, there's good questions like that, Glenn claims. Zen's Forehead, thank you so much, $5 for the super chat. You're a phenomenal debater. Thank you. Let me see if I can find those super chats. I think it would only be fair. I hope people understand during the debate, it's very difficult to read super chats. I think people understand that because I'm trying to, even when I'm debating people that maybe I don't respect as much as people like Jimbob and Andrew, I'm always trying to do my best to give them my attention. So I think Bob and audiences pretty much at this point understand that, I'm not going to get to a lot of the chats and things like that. Let me see. Fan funding. There we go. Okay. Lord of the Nerds for $2. Thanks so much. And I didn't see any of these, so the people that were trying to help me out, thank you. Well done, Rob. Drive home the genetic fallacy. Thank you so much. Lord of the Nerds, another $2, says child minors is what's making military tech. That's funny. Lord of the Nerds, another $2, says the average black woman would eat Jimbob's lunch. John Rock for $2 says all good debaters on the right need super chats. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Rachel Wilson for $20. Thank you so much. Says, even though you know how I feel about the subject, you're putting up a great fight. Thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate it. Rachel's phenomenal. She's literally written a book on the subject, so hats off to her. And I always like talking to Rachel as well. Zen's Forehead, thanks so much, says for $5, you're a phenomenal debater. Really appreciate it. Tainted Holy for $5 says, easy counter to the draft arguments. We all could do a draft with women, but we want our nation to not collapse. We need women to survive and reproduce. Yeah, that's not a bad argument, that they have a more important role. Yeah, I thought it was a fun debate. Angel says, I'm Crucible Crew. I disagree with your position, but you did an excellent job. You're the best political debater on the internet. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Understand this. I think Andrew is a better philosophical debater than me. Jimbob maybe as well, right? It's not my forte. I'm a very simple man. I'm arguing sort of on a pragmatic level on a day-to-day basis of things that I see in real life. So I think it makes me an effective political debater more so than a philosophical debater. But I'm also someone who tries to be forthright and authentic, and I think I could put thoughts together, and so I'm okay in a philosophical debate. I think I do just fine in them. But I'm trying my best to sort of go through the direction that Jimbob wants, sort of with his syllogism that he put work into. So I hope it came across as that I was competent and being, authentic and trying to push back on it. And listen, this is the God's honest truth, right? Like, it's not always easy to go into a crowd that you know is predispositioned to like you and give them arguments you know they're not going to like. It's not always the funnest thing in the world to do. I don't know did anybody catch how many people were watching the Crucible? I hope it was through the roof. But I assume there were thousands of people watching there. If I didn't do this debate tonight, and to the first time they see me or is in the past, or they see me tomorrow debating with Andrew for Trump against Kamala Harris, those people are going to be like, Rob's great. He's great. He's great. So to be on there today, 2.2 thousand. Yeah. So to be on there today, right, the day before that, and be like giving them all the ammunition in the world to be like, not enjoying my position. But that's okay. That's what I do. And I hope that that comes through, that, I'm just trying to be my authentic self. And I actually really enjoy debating with people in the right wing. Having said that, again, I stand by my interpretation that I think it's a mistake to be talking about subjects like this so heavily going into this election. It's one thing to do it amongst friends like me, Jimbob, and Andrew. That's fine. It's not like, if I just wouldn't have debated this, then we would have won the election. I don't think it's that. But I see this as a problem more thematically throughout the Republican Party. We're having all of this infighting on issues that aren't really germane to, what's going on. Tucker Carlson's bringing on Martyr Maid to talk about Churchill, the real villain of World War II. And then we spend a week news cycle that we could be hammering home how disastrous the policies of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have been. And we're talking about whether or not we should platform people that are saying that Churchill was a bad dude. I mean, it just seems to be you know, that the Democrats seem to be on board at pushing home a narrative like holistically, that they're all on board pushing it, and we seem to spend more time fighting and arguing topics amongst each other than pushing home a narrative. And it's a shame too, because I think we have the facts on our side. The policies of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are a disaster, and so the big problem is, can we break through that control of the narrative that their institutions have so much of, where they control almost all of our entertainment, almost all of our social media, almost all of our legacy media, mainstream media? Can we break through that? And when you have the facts on your side and you just need to get your message out to people, I think the infighting is problematic. And I think you even see, you know, a missed opportunity where I think Trump could have done it better in his debate, where we had an opportunity to kind of identify Kamala Harris, who's hiding. That was one time she couldn't hide, and I don't think that it came out as very positive. So, you know, I don't know that they had really a good counter to why this is a topic to be discussing so heavily right now. I know it's something that they firmly believe in, and by all means, you should talk about what you believe in. I just question the efficacy of it right now and how that pragmatically will end up. Do you think that's because we are trying to find our own narrative? Certainly that's part of it. Certainly that's absolutely part of it. I don't deny that. You don't want to deny who you are for the sake of some short-term political victory, but there's also a point of strategicness and understanding that there is certain mechanisms that you have to go through. You have to win elections and things like that to achieve political outcomes. So, you know, Mr. E, what's happening, man? Long time no see. Yeah, me and Andrew are going to have fun tomorrow. You know, tell Gibbs and the Turk they could take the night off if they want. Just sit quietly and leave Andrew and me be a wrecking crew. I don't know. I'm kind of looking forward to. We'll see how Andrew's doing. I might sit back a little. Normally, when I'm on a panel on my side, I try to control the conversation, but I have total confidence that Andrew will do just fine. So who knows? Maybe I'll take a secondary seat. Am I going for blood on the panel tomorrow? I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I try to reciprocate energy. You know. So, yeah, Mr. E, just so you know, I think he knows, because Andrew, the debate is not on NATO. It's who's better for the future, Kamala or Trump. That's the topic for tomorrow. Apparently, the title on the Crucible had to do with NATO, and that's not going to be the case. So, they changed it. I like this topic way better than NATO, but, I mean, shit, I would have debated NATO, too. I don't care. It don't matter to me. But I much prefer to debate Trump versus Kamala. I think it's more timely, and I think it's things that I have more of an interest in. Always go for blood before saying. It usually ends that way, doesn't it? So, even tonight gets a little bit chippy, but we're fucking men. You know, it's all right. Who am I debating tomorrow? The debate is a panel moderated by Dylan Burns. On my side, defending Trump will be me, Andrew Wilson, Admiral Gibbs, and the Turk. And on the opposite side will be Pisco, I'm Really Important, Hutch, and Not So Erudite. So it'll be a 4-on-4. I would much prefer a 2-on-2, but, you know, and not just because I'm saying that Turk and Gibbs aren't good debaters. I'm not making any comment on them. I just think once you get to 3 or 4 people per side, it's hard to have a focused conversation. It becomes more disparate. You know, if you watch CNN and you see their panel of 8 people, it's like, then it's just like trying to get a zinger in, you know, because you don't have time to develop a long argument. So for me, I always prefer 1-on-1 debates. That's my preference. But 2-on-2 could work just fine. Pisco's a decent debater. I think he's clearly head and shoulders above those. Erudite, I've only debated once, wasn't that impressed. IRI's not a very good debater. He'll meme his way through it. Hutch is less effective than Pisco, but it's okay. He could debate somewhat. Yeah, that's one of the things that's fun about debating someone like Jimbob or Andrew. They'll give you an honest answer. And even me, I try to do that as well. So I'm glad you noticed that. Damien, thanks so much for the super chat, says $2. How would you rate the opposition lineup scale 1 to 10 tomorrow? I'd put Pisco. Pisco's one of the better people I debate on legal issues. Not quite as good on political issues. So I'd give Pisco an 8 out of 10. I'd give Hutch probably a 6.5 out of 10. I'd give IRI maybe a 4 or a 5 out of 10. Erudite, I haven't interacted enough to know. The one time I debated her, I'd give her about a 5 out of 10. That's probably what I would say. Yeah, I saw Biden put on the Trump hat. Yeah, one of the things you have to know, let me give a little advice if you're ever on a debate panel. You got to fill it out as it's going. Sometimes you have to understand that the most effective thing you could do is take a back seat. If someone's rolling, man, that you agree with, you got to just take a back seat sometimes. When we did the arena, one of the things you're trying to do when you're a host setting up a panel is you can't do a successful panel with 6 people that talk as much as me and Andrew. You can't do it. It just won't work. So you want the people you know are going to drive the direction of the debate and talk a lot. Then you want people that you build around that. People that might not talk as much but will have good input here and there, but they don't need to be the people driving the conversation. And so a good producer is trying to fill those gaps in. But if you just put me and Andrew Wilson and Pisco and Destiny and, I don't know, 4 other people that talk as much as us, it's going to be a shit show. Not so. You put not really important at a 2. There's ends for. That's funny. But yeah, it'll be fun. I could talk faster than Destiny too if I wanted. So, but hey, thanks to Jimbob, thanks to Andrew. I thought the moderation was fine. Thanks to all the people that called in. Thanks to the people that watched on my channel. I really appreciate it. Thanks to the people especially that donated on my channel. Very much appreciated. And also thanks to the people that donated to the Crucible. Regardless of what you think. Now, if you're a lefty and you don't like Andrew, that's one thing. But if you're a righty and you agreed with me, I think Crucible is an important platform. One, because it's nice to know that there's such a growing right-wing platform talking about political and cultural issues, even if I don't agree with everything they say, on a place like YouTube. I think that's very important, particularly for winning cultural arguments. But also because individually, Andrew Wilson and the Crucible have both been incredibly generous to me, put me on, helped me out many times as I asked. So got to tip my cap to them, and it's always great to see them being successful. So I hope that it helped bring some views in there today. I hope that audience liked it, and I hope that Andrew and Jimbob were happy with the debate. I was. I'll take the L. Thanks, AB. I don't think I took the L, but I don't mind that people thought I did. I could say honestly, I think I won the debate, but that's almost always the case that unless you get blown out, you're going to think you won because you're you and you're biased towards your own arguments. But that's the type of debate where I can honestly say I don't have a problem with people thinking that Jimbob won the debate. I thought he debated very competently, and if you're predisposed to his ideas, I don't think you're a loon for saying I think Jimbob did better. So, but yeah, I didn't think I lost, but that's fair. Mileage will vary. So the chat won. There you go. So it's hard, man. It's and I don't mind different people. Thanks so much, John Kell, for the support. $5 says just for some support, Rob. I appreciate it, man. Yeah, I think I will say this. There is no doubt in my mind that Pisco and Hutch and I'm Really Important, and I don't know about Erudite, but that they've collaborated and talked to each other and came up with a plan. I swear to you, I haven't talked. The only plan I had was I reached out to Andrew and was like, hey, man, what's the topic tomorrow? That's the only discussion we've had. So we're men. We go in with our own opinions. We don't need to fucking collectivize like them. No, I don't think I have memberships turned on, Mystery. I don't know how to do it. So I got to figure out how to do that. I'm going to try to figure that out here in the near future. I'm too fucking lazy, as you know, Mystery. Like, I'm lazy and I'm busy, and it's a terrible combination. I like hitting stream and streaming and talking. That's what I like doing. I like debating. I hate doing all the background shit. I really do. And so I haven't even taken the time to do the bare minimum to learn how to turn subscriptions on YouTube, which is probably costing me money. Give us good emotes. All right, I'll try to get on it. Yeah, things get trickier afterwards. There's always a perception problem with the moderator when he's asking questions that because the fact that they're the moderator, there's a position of authority that always makes it harder to argue with the moderator in that sense. And then obviously, I think Andrew's a very good debater anyways, and then a lot of the callers are very good debaters, and it was clear that not only were they making good arguments, but perceptually the entire room's against me. So that makes it even perceptually look like it's harder for me to win. And they were making good arguments. I'm not making excuses by it. So, Trump should debate. I think he's making a mistake not debating. I think he should at least say, sure, we'll do a debate and offer like Fox News and then leave Kamala Harris turn it down. I think perceptually that would have been a better thing. He already knows what Kamala's going to do, so I don't think that there's much to lose for him to step up there. But hey, maybe they know something we don't. Look, there's a possibility that they know that this sort of report that's going to come on and the failures of the Secret Service, maybe it's going to be super devastating, and they're thinking that that's going to move the needle. And so, strategic, I always want more debates. For me, as a voter, the more I know about the candidates, the better. But there is a gamesmanship to politics. There's the strategic level of it. The reason Trump didn't debate in the primaries was quite simply because Trump had the primary wrapped up. So it could only harm him. If you think there's a 99% chance you're winning the election, why risk it by debating? You can only harm yourself. That's why Trump didn't debate. So Trump's calculus right now is he don't think the debate's worth it. Kamala's calculus previous to this debate was only one debate's worth it. We'll do the one so it doesn't look like we're running, and that's it. Yeah, Crazy Coke, it's weird. And again, it's difficult when I do believe in fine general. The difference is I believe that people should have the freedom to make choices they want. Right? So you'll see a theme with me. Like, for example, one of the things with me, I never said that you shouldn't be allowed to take the vaccine for the pandemic. I never said that. I didn't even weigh in on whether you should take it. I didn't, because I was like, hey, man, talk to a medical professional for your own situation. My gut feeling is the vaccine was far more dangerous than we were led to believe, but it's still beneficial to certain people. For example, if you're 86 years old with COPD and a case of COVID would likely have a far more serious outcome to you, maybe the risk of side effects from the vaccine would be worth it. But if you're Kyrie Irving, one of the healthiest fit individuals in the world, should we be forcing that dude to take the vaccine? Would it be beneficial to him? Probably not. So my argument was always just against the forcing of it. It's very similar with this argument here. If you want to convince women, hey, you shouldn't vote, I have no problem with that. I would rather convince them they should vote for the side I think would be beneficial, but okay, fine. What I have a problem with is using the government to tell them that they can't. That's the problem I have. I think Trump's chances of winning were between 5 and 7%. Hope or cope, I could say I thought about the same in 2016 and I was wrong. So, I've been wrong once. Why can't I be wrong twice? So, all right. It's 1 a.m. I got to get to bed. Tomorrow night debate, and then I'll be taking the weekend off. I'll be working. So 7 to 10. Okay, Yodi. So thanks so much, everyone. We'll raid someone on Twitch for my Twitch followers, and then I'll get out of your hair tonight. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I said beforehand, I was expecting more of a religious conversation. I really was. I'm kind of surprised it didn't go in that direction. But, oh boy. No one's on that I know. This is always tough. Well, we'll raid Pisco. He's on. I'll have to say, even if you think that Pisco is an equal debater to me, which I don't think. I don't think that. But isn't it interesting to see, he probably gets, when he streams, at least on Twitch, 10 times the audience of me, or 5 times the audience of me. Man, left-wing privilege on these spaces, huh? It's amazing. But good for him. I don't care. So we're raiding Pisco. Be nice. Okay? I know most of you don't like him. That's okay. Be nice. But it's the only person on that I see that I know. So, all right, I'm out of here. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it, even if you disagreed with me. I try to make things entertaining, and I try to be effective in what I'm doing. So I hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks so much, everyone. As always, have a good one.